overview.
I think the board packet included an overview, and really there's not much more to add than that. This is a group we began bargaining, end of last summer, late fall, and finally came to agreement, as you can, just at the end of January, 2-year agreement, financial reopener after April of this year, and that is similar to our other MEA union agreements except for the teachers. And then everyone received a step increase, be effective upon your ratification of the agreement. Those in the top step will receive a $250 stipend to be paid in March. We looked for some consistency amongst the non-GREA union agreements. So as you can see, longevity steps 1 and 2 were increased in terms of dollar amount they get paid to be consistent with the other MEA groups. Insurance hard caps, all the groups, including the exempt employees, got hard cap increases effective for us January 1st. For this group, again, upon ratification, those new hard caps will go into effect for that group. And then for all groups, we increase the vision frame allowance from, I think it was $60 to $135 annually. So
Mr. Roberts, could I ask who exactly are these people?
they are family
Not
support.
names.
They're the family support specialists. So they really support our students and families. So they go out with home visits and meet with families to support our students. Not a very large union, but certainly very important.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a motion to approve this contract?
Motion to approve the contract?
Support.
Ms. Lewis?
Ms. Jackie?
Thank you, Mr. Oberst.
Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Dr. Baker?
Yes.
Ms. Davis?
Yes.
Dr. Flores?
Yes.
Ms. Lewis, yes. Reverend Matias?
Yes.
Mr. Ross?
Yes.
And President Grant?
Yes. All right, thank you. Now we can move to our special order of business. Our first candidate that we will have our first interview with is Dr. Darren Slade. And as soon as his space is prepared, we'll be ready for him. If we're gonna go around. We're ready. Oh, that's actually. One housekeeping item is that we do have feedback forms for individuals who are here, so you can ask Ms. Anderson if you would like a form to complete. We appreciate your feedback. Also, for those who are listening in on live stream, you can find feedback forms in English and Spanish. Those forms are found at surveymonkey.com/r/superintendent feedback 2020. Is there, Mr. Himho, is there also a place for them to find that link online?
Right on the homepage of the website.
The link is right on the homepage, so you don't have to remember that. You can go to grps.org and complete those feedback forms. We do appreciate your participation. Okay, so for right now, we are live streaming in English only. We are working on some technical difficulties, but the Spanish version of the live stream will be up, and there will be several days for everyone to be able to review that video. Okay, welcome, Dr. Slade. How are you?
How you doing this evening?
Good. Thank you for being with us today. We are pleased to have you as one of the finalists for the superintendency at Grand Rapids Public Schools. We are looking forward to learning more from you. Before we get started, I would like to make you aware of what to expect. All candidates will be asked the same questions throughout this process. You will have 15 minutes to provide your initial presentation and responding to the board's prompt, how can we accelerate learning and close the achievement gap for all learners within GRPS? Your interview will be 60 minutes and it includes 17 questions. At the conclusion of each interview, there will be an opportunity for you to ask any questions that you have of the board.
Okay, thank you. I want to first thank the board for inviting me back this evening. I had a chance today to visit 3 schools, and I also had a chance to participate in multiple focus groups. It was a great experience for me. I appreciate the honesty and the passion that I witnessed today. I had a chance to talk to teachers and principals, and everybody seemed to be dedicated. Everybody seemed to be loyal and just demonstrated an overwhelming sense of passion for this district. I actually met one gentleman who said he's been recruited by other districts, but he wants to stay in this district because he has such a passion for the work. So I want to just thank you for that opportunity. I also want to thank the people who met with me today in the focus groups. I mean, especially the student group, they had some of the best questions ever. They were so good, I thought they were actually prepared by the other adults, but they had some of the best questions. So I want to just thank those students and teachers and staff I had a chance to meet with today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we were charged with coming up with a plan of how to basically improve student achievement. And what I wanted to do was I titled my presentation Moving from Good to Great based on some of the great things that are currently happening in the system. And I'm gonna talk about those things in a minute. And just for a quick background, I've been an educator for 30 years, and in all my time doing this work, I've been involved in just focusing on improving student achievement for all the students that I've had the opportunity to serve. Hey, Greg, I want to just talk about some of the great things happening in Grand Rapids Public Schools, first of all. And these are things that have been happening since 2012. And I spoke about this in my previous interview. Grand Rapids is one of the few systems in our country, urban systems, where you've had consistent improvement over a span of 5 or more years. And what I'm talking about is student achievement gains in reading and math, increased graduation rates, student enrollment increases, a reduction of student achievement gaps across subgroups, and I'm mainly talking about minority students, special ed students. That's very rare to see that happening. And also the identification of a promise zone designation, so students who want to go to college have the opportunity by the system and some of the great folks who, business partners in our community, providing the funding for that to happen. Even though we have some things to celebrate, we still have a system that has a few major challenges. This was also discussed today in some of the focus groups. There seems to be some disparity between student achievement rates in the theme schools compared to the community schools, also some other concerns in that area. Student achievement data still lags behind the state in multiple areas, and you always want your school system to be above the state as it relates to student achievement. You still, even though things have improved, our subgroups' performance still does not match that of our majority group. We have to focus on that. And this was talked about in the focus groups today. School culture and climate issues still exist, and they also negatively impact student achievement. This is common in all school systems, urban, rural, suburban. And even though our graduation rate has improved almost 30%, those rates still need to improve so they're above state averages in every school. If I become the superintendent, these are some things I propose as goals. Of course, this will happen after I meet with multiple stakeholders to just discuss what you think the goals should be. But these are universal goals for any school system. We need to make sure that all of our students are on grade level in reading and math. And you gauge that by end of the year test scores, qualitative data from teachers and staff, SAT scores, college entry and completion rates. Same thing for math. Look at end of the year test scores, what's happening in classrooms every day, college acceptance rates, and how students are doing when they go into college in those math classes. As you know, a lot of students have to take remedial courses when they in the college, especially in the area of math. it would be great to have a system-wide graduation rate of 90% or above by 2023. Increase the seat offerings for our IB and advanced placement programs by 2% each year. I just gave that number. I think 2% should be a minimum. I think it would be better if we had 5%, but that's all open for discussion. Student attendance has improved over the past 6 years, but it still needs to improve to the point where it's 90% or above. And also just a creation of an accountability system that kind of focuses on where we stand in these areas over the course of a school year. That's very important. The 4 target areas for improving systemic student achievement: a focus on principal instructional leadership. The principal is in charge of the building. The principal sets the tone for what happens in the building. So I think we should focus on principal instructional leadership. School systems that have done this in the past across the country have shown major gains. Also, increasing the capacity for teachers as it relates to delivering quality instruction, that has to be a focus. And I'm going to talk about instituting a network system of instructional support, where if a teacher needs support, they can have support, direct support, and within a 48-hour period. Intentional focused intervention and enrichment for all of our students. If a student is 2 or 3 grades below, we should have staff members who are identified to support that. And also, if you have students who are performing above average, which in every system you always have students who are doing great things, I think that group of students sometimes is shortchanged in public school systems. So I think we should have people who focus on students who are below, students who are on average, and students who are above average. Also, we have to enhance our parent community involvement. Although I will say, I went online and researched, I think Grand Rapids is ahead of the curve as it relates to parental involvement. The parent university is great. The courses offered are great. We went to a building today, GRPS University. I thought it was a separate college, but it's the place where we have staff development and opportunities for our staff. So I think we are ahead of the ball in that area. Okay, so principals must be instructional leaders. And what do I mean by that? Principals must have the capacity where they can help their teachers to become better. We have a lot of situations where you have principals who are still operating that traditional form, kind of focusing on operational and management areas. Principals must be the ones in the building who can be the first line of defense when it relates to helping teachers become better at delivering instruction. And that being said, principals must be able to provide quality PD and coaching to the teachers that they supervise. And this is an issue in a lot of our school systems across the country. The focus has to be on providing principals with training where they can provide quality feedback and coaching and help teachers improve. That plays a role in retention. One of the reasons that teachers leave the profession is because they don't feel they're supported by the administration. So I think that has to be a big issue, and where the frontline principals can support teachers every day in terms of becoming better instructional leaders also in their classroom. I think this has to be guided by using data, classroom data, what students are doing in their classes every day, quizzes, exit tickets as far as what students are doing in terms of their reading, math, science, social studies. Also just promoting quality instruction for students below grade level and advanced learners by intensifying our support by hiring reading and math interventionists, and I'll talk about that at a later time. I think the people who supervise principals must be instructional leaders. You must have a history of success as a principal in order for you to supervise principals. In some cases, that's not always the case. I think we need to make sure that's happening in Grand Rapids Public Schools. And also, and I looked and I saw this is all already in place, but we have to make sure that we have an instrument that evaluates and kind of provides automatic, immediate feedback to teachers. And I think it has to be a computerized system where we can look and monitor the progress that teachers are making and the type of feedback that's being provided by the principal to the teachers they supervise. Okay, as I said earlier, the instructional leadership has been seen as one of the main factors for improving student achievement. If you look at the latest issue of Ed Week, which is the primary educational journal in our country, 6 large urban school districts invested in principals and saw dramatic gains across their system in student achievement. This is data that's coming from 2 weeks ago. And these are some of the biggest systems in the country, so I'm sure if we focus on the same thing in Grand Rapids, we'll have the same success. So, and the way we will do that is just by having monthly training for principals inside of their buildings, outside of their buildings. I believe in sending principals to all the conferences that take place across the country just to make sure they become instructional leaders. And I will say, myself as a former principal, I feel like I am an expert in the area of instructional leadership, so I could kind of lead that work. The second thing we need to focus on as a system to improve student achievement is just building teacher capacity. and provide, and I like to use the word overwhelming, providing overwhelming support to teachers when they need it. If a teacher feels like they are not equipped to provide quality instruction, we need to put a system in place where if a teacher has a concern about anything related to instruction or academia, we could send people into that building within 48 hours to provide direct support. And that's something that we use currently in Kansas City. And I passed out a folder where in the last 2 years, we've had the biggest instructional gains in Kansas City in the last 30 years. We're at the point now of moving from being an unaccredited system to an accredited system based on the work that we've done in this area. I think the people who are part of the network, and I'm gonna talk about this in a minute, they have to be experts in that field. So the people we have on our network team, and I'm gonna show the configuration for that in a second, those have to be people whose teachers feel are experts as it relates to their identified subject. And those will be the people who provide staff development, and those will also be the people who come in and provide direct support to our teaching and the rest of our instructional staff. Based on the size of the system, I think you need at least one elementary team and one secondary team to be on these networks. Okay, how do networks function? You would have 2 to 3 network specialists for each assigned content area. For example, at the elementary level, you'll have somebody assigned for math, somebody assigned to social studies, somebody assigned for ELA. And these will be the people who, when a teacher requests support or a principal requests support, they will go directly to that school, go directly to that classroom, and provide the support that the teachers need. And it's normally just how to deliver instruction in a better manner. You have 1 or 2 specialists assigned to the content areas, especially at the high school level, math, science, social studies. So for the more advanced classes like chemistry, you have somebody who's an expert in that area. So these networks form a team and they get assigned to a certain group of schools. And these same groups, they meet once a month with the instructional leadership team who are the assistant principals who supervise teaching. And also, you will bring the principals in, and we'll discuss school by school, teacher by teacher, what needs to be done in some of the growth areas and some of the areas of concern, some of the positives that we're seeing as we go into these schools. But the main thing I want to talk about for the networks is that they are people who are assigned to provide direct support, so you have no excuses when a teacher will not have those obstacles and barriers that are in place as it relates to moving student achievement. One thing that we do in Kansas City, it would be great to do it here, is to have a flex day every month of support where if you have any concern related to instruction, related to classroom management, you could come to an identified area and we have 10 people there who could support you and provide you with the training and necessary information you need to become a better teacher and become a better instructor. This is how we have our networks formed in Kansas City right now. We currently have 3 networks. So if you look up here on the screen, we have 12 schools in each, 12 schools in 2 networks, 10 in the other networks, and all these people are the people who come into schools to support teachers. When you talk about why teachers leave, and I went to the focus groups today, one of the primary things that came up was teacher retention. One of the main reasons that teachers leave systems again is because they don't feel supported. If you look up here on the screen, we will have all these people identified to support our teaching staff. What I mean by support, again, is just coming into their classrooms, showing them how to teach, modeling lessons, just letting them have an avenue where they don't feel like they're alone in the classroom. Something else that has been effective across school systems and something that we do in Kansas City, I also did it when I was a principal in the 5 schools I worked in, is just have basic instructional imperatives assigned to every teacher, meaning basic things like having a lesson plan every day, posting student work, making sure grade assignments are graded and feedback are provided by to students, making sure that grades are inputted into the identified system, making sure that data is used to guide decision making. For example, if all your students take a quiz on Monday and everybody failed the quiz, you have to go back as a teacher and make adjustments based on that data. That doesn't always happen in classrooms. Make sure that when you go into a classroom, you see that there are different groups assigned based on skill levels and differentiation is taking place. That's something that's easily observed by a principal or people in my position, school leadership, where you can make sure that students are learning. And this must be evidenced by student performance and growth in each area. We must have an intensified academic support for students. I talked about that earlier. We should have something in place, and I know it's in place probably now, but a universal screening system for all students who enter our system. When students start school at the beginning of the year, should be some kind of test that they take that identifies their reading level and with how they're performing in math. And we make decisions on placement based on that. We make decisions on scheduling based on student performance. You just can't look at test data. We need to triangulate multiple data sources, qualitative information from teaching staff, looking at project-based learning assessments and outcomes, and make our assessments about student performance based on multiple data sources. We also need to tier schools based on historic performance, meaning that all schools will not receive the same level of support. I was in one of the focus groups today, and they were talking about a perception of all schools not being given the same resources. We could address that issue basically by looking at data. One way you change perceptions is to present facts and data to people. So that way, one of the things that kind of came up today was just the perception that there's a difference in between performance at theme schools and performance in the community schools. And I don't think that's true in some cases, but we have to be able to defend our resources and how we operate based on data. So if we put something like this in place, it's something that easily to defend, and also will kind of increase the morale and the perception, I think, revolving around some of the people in our school system. Also, we need to utilize current instructional support staff, reading and math. This is something really big that's been effective. Hiring reading and math interventionists to come into our schools to support teachers, and also to provide pull-out for students. So for students in the 4th grade, we're working on the 2nd grade level. We have folks in that building who can pull those students out, provide the instruction that the students need to try to catch them back up so they could end up graduating on grade level. We talked about a 3rd grade law that's in effect in Michigan. The same laws in effect in Missouri. We had the same kind of law in effect when I worked in Baltimore. And the way we kind of address that is just by making sure students go to 3rd grade on grade level. They go to 5th grade on grade level. And the way you do that is by increasing instructional time. So if a student is 3 grades below in the 6th grade, I think that having the regular core subject, the regular core period, but also that additional time when that reading interventionist pulls or that math person pulls that student out for additional support will catch students up so that we don't have to retain. Because when you retain students, it leads to students dropping out of school, and the research says that that's not the best way to deal with students below grade level. One thing that's great about Grand Rapids is the number of high-quality, rigorous programs that are in place right now. I think we need to continue that. We continue to offer the high-quality programs in some of our, I think it's city, high school, middle school. Some of our theme schools are doing great things. That needs to continue. We need to promote AP classes in every high school. When I was a principal, we did not have many AP classes when I started at the high school level for 6 years, but when we ended, I think we had at least 15 AP courses, and our students started to really show gains on our SAT scores and our ACT scores. So I think just promoting AP participation and promoting where all students should be at least in one AP course. We had to kind of force some of our students to take the AP classes. Some of our parents didn't want their students in AP classes initially, but once we put them in the classes, they rose to the rigor and the grade level that was expected. Ensure that students have access to IB programs. And again, we have some schools that are doing very well in this system, especially some of our theme schools. So keep that going on, but also just make sure that all students have access to these programs and are aware of these programs. And that must start at the elementary school level. We have to have a college-going culture across the system, and I've seen that in some of the schools I visited today, but that must start at the elementary school level where we're talking about college, we're going on college trips, we have banners and things posted in our hallways, and everybody's on the same page as it relates to how important it is for students to go to college. And also, they don't want to. One of the students asked me this question today when the student said they didn't want to really go to college. So we need to make sure that we have that avenue available, but also we prepare students so if they don't want to go to college, they could go into the military or go into a high-paying work or occupational field that we prepare them for just by having coursework that aligns with their goals. I talked about tutoring earlier. We need to focus on high school performance. We need to have multiple language offerings. There are some positions right now that I cannot apply for because I only speak one language. I think we need to have a situation where all of our students are exposed to multiple languages. I think in this country now you have to be bilingual if you really, especially as we look at our 20-year goals. I think that needs to be a goal for all systems where students are leaving high school on the path to being bilingual. I talked about the pull and push out support, and also we need to increase. A student asked this question today about dual enrollment. I think we need to improve that. I think it's going well, but we need to make sure that every student in the system has access to dual enrollment opportunities. Again, I'm very impressed with the parent communication and messaging from what I see online and what I heard today, but we have to continue to even improve that. And I think one thing we need to focus on is making sure that parents feel heard and their voice and opinions are heard, and we kind of act on that. So the way we do that is just having forums like this that we had today, do that all ongoing through the school year, where parents feel heard and we kind of act on that. I think you do that by mandating meetings in every school. That's already happening. Making sure that parents receive grade level reading lists and other materials, and making sure we kind of promote homework. We're kind of moving away from promoting homework, but I think that's something that parents need to be involved in at home, where they see what their child is doing during the school day and they continue to practice it at home. We do a great job in this district as far as I'm concerned, as far as messaging. I think we have one of the best websites I've seen, but that also can improve just by getting some feedback by what we could do to make it even better from our parents that we serve. We need to have increased academic clubs. We had a chess club in the schools that I worked in, dance, drama, theater. I think that has to be part of GPR, Grand Rapids Public Schools. And that was a question I was asking all the focus groups that I went in today. Surveys have to continue, and also we have to just have a basic, and if you look at the last bullet, we have to have a way that parents can hold us accountable. I always tell my parents that you should hold us accountable having like basic assessments, and one of the ones I used to use when I was an elementary school principal is using my favorite book, The Cat in the Hat. I should tell my third grade parents that when you go home, your child at the end of third grade should be able to read The Cat in the Hat and tell you what it means and comprehends. And if they can't do that, you need to come back to the school and hold us accountable for that. And have us put some things in place to try to support your child and make them, so when they do finish the appropriate grade, they are reading on grade level. And again, this all aligns with what I heard earlier today in terms of the third grade law and just making sure that students leave high school on grade level. You cannot talk about student achievement without talking about some of the barriers that exist in our system and in all urban systems. I want to first talk about having students who come to school below grade level. I spoke to some teachers today and I said, is that an issue in Grand Rapids? They said, yes, it is, that students who come to school 2 and 3 grades below. And the way you approach that is by utilizing a network system, having reading and math interventionists, having tutoring at the school, increasing instructional time, improving our special ed educational program. When I was a principal, I provided the same instructional support to our special ed students and teachers as I did to the regular ed students. We had a 20% gain in our special ed performance, and that also is continuing in the system I'm working now. You also have to talk about challenging student behavior. One of the reasons that teachers leave the profession is because of student behavior, and the way you address that is being consistent, holding students accountable for following rules, holding parents accountable for making sure that their students following rules, but also providing social workers, mental health support, trauma support, promotion of extracurricular activities, and just instituting basic restorative justice practices. A lot of our students are faced with trauma, and if you look in that folder, every year as a high school principal, I would have one of our students involved in some kind of violent act. And the Washington Post did a story on one of my students who, right before graduation, his parent was involved in some serious violence where he passed away. And the school had to work as a team to provide this student with clothes for graduation, clothes to try to go to college, money just to make sure that he could survive every day. And this is something that the student kind of credited our system, our school, our staff, and the principal with just making sure he was supported. And that has to become a norm in the system where students feel supported by the adults that they work with. So I just wanted to use that illustration just to show how all students, for the most part now, a whole lot of our students are faced with trauma that we couldn't even imagine when we were coming up. This young man, again, his father was involved in a violent act. At the same time, he was just going through a lot of stuff, but we worked as a team, as a school, just to support him. And the article also talks about how we had a lot of career pathways in place where this student was able to end up going into becoming a fireman because of the things that we had in place in our school. So below average classroom instruction would be addressed again by our network support. That network support is one of the best things I've ever seen. That's one thing that if I go work in another system, I will take that network support process with me, because when you can provide that immediate support to teachers, you just don't understand how much they appreciate that. And we've had a lot of teachers who I could at least think of 2 who were going to quit the profession, but because of our network support, they remain in the profession. And again, that's how you address below classroom instruction, just by making sure teachers become better educators and are better with delivering instruction. A lot of our teaching staff in Kansas City, I'm not going to say a lot, but some of them have low expectations related to student performance, and that's kind of based on, in some ways, implicit bias, and in other areas related to cultural competency. So we had to provide training on that continue training and making sure that our students and our teachers know that you cannot work with all students in the same way. You just have to be aware of that, and those are sometimes difficult conversations, but they have to be had if you want to continue the gains in student achievement that have been made in this system. At this point, I don't know how this works, but I'm open to any questions, and comments, or concerns, or if we want to move into the interview section.
We do not have questions scheduled for this portion, but we do have follow-up questions scheduled throughout the interview. So we will have follow-up questions for you in the initial questions. But thank you very much for that presentation.
Thank you.
Do you need a moment, a
No,
drink
no.
of water?
I'm good.
Are you
I'm
ready?
good.
Okay. Okay, so question number 1 is, what did you find most interesting about your visit to our buildings? What was your impression of what you saw and heard? Please be honest and direct with the good and possibly not so good.
Okay, the first thing that stood out to me is that I only visited 3 schools, but I've met at least 4 or 5 staff members who have 40+ years in the system. That just shows you that you have staff who really love working for this system. And again, I talked about how 1 or 2 of them talked about how they had been recruited by some of the suburban systems, they wanted to stay. So just the dedication and passion that the staff has to the system, that's the first thing that stood out to me. Also, I had a chance to meet 3 principals who were very enthused and passionate about the profession. They were very honest with me when I posed questions, both good and bad. So the fact that we have principals who are very focused and honest about what's going well in the system and what's not going well, I think that's something that kind of stood out. And just the focus groups. I met with a group of parents, community members, and students, and also had a chance to come in here and meet with the cabinet and also the central office staff. So it seemed to be the same themes presented in every focus group, and I think that just shows you that it's kind of easy to target where Grand Rapids needs to go in the next step. So those are the things that stood out to me the most, just the passion I saw with the staff, the great questions posed by all stakeholders, especially the students. And these were students all coming from different schools. I mean, they had the best questions. And just the fact that when I met with the different focus groups, they all seemed to say the same things as it relates to what's going well and what the system needs to focus on. So I guess it makes it easy if whoever's hired to start planning for next steps.
Dr. Slade, how would you determine the strengths, capabilities of your key administrative staff? Please also share how you might approach the difficult task of restructuring, reassigning, or releasing individuals as necessary.
Okay, so one thing I said in my first interview, again, coming from Baltimore, DC, and Kansas City, these were all systems that we were facing state takeover, we were facing reconstitution, meaning closing schools for low performance. We are not in that place in Grand Rapids. So I think whoever comes in, whoever's lucky enough to be hired, they need to take their time and listen to all stakeholders. You listen to people. You can't make assumptions. You just can't make blanket assumptions. You also can't believe everything you heard. One of the things I said today during the focus groups is I like to investigate. So even now I supervise 16 schools, and doing that work, you always have certain concerns about different schools. I always go directly to the school and investigate before I act. I just don't believe what I hear. So before I made any staff changes or any changes to anything, I would talk to the stakeholders, meaning all the different groups like I talked to today, go and investigate the actual data associated with that, and then make changes based on that. But there's no way, it wouldn't be wise for anybody who took this position to come in and make changes without doing a deep investigation of where the status of the administrative team or the status of school staff. But I will say this, one of the reasons I've been successful as a school leader in all the positions I've been in is because I do not mind making the difficult decision when necessary. If somebody's not performing and we've been fair and tried to provide adequate support and we've been fair and had honest conversation with that person, I do not mind making difficult decisions. And I think that's one of the reasons I've had some success in my past leadership roles.
Thank you very much, sir.
All right. Think about 1 or 2 of the most difficult initiatives that you have implemented as an educational leader, and then discuss how you built consensus around those initiatives, and please give us some examples.
Okay, so when I was in DC, we had certain rules that were not enforced. And again, I was charged as a principal, and I'm gonna speak about, and I won't constantly talk about being a principal because my current superintendent, when I taught them, he says the best preparation for being a superintendent was his experience as a high school principal. So I won't speak about that in some of my responses. So when I was a high school principal, we had a policy as it related to attendance. I was in the school, we had a 48% attendance rate, and we had moved it from 48%, and that's not in the folder, but there's some other things in the folder. So we went from 48% to 73%. So we needed to initiate and hold students accountable. We had a 10-day rule. If you were absent 10 days, it was supposed to impact your grade. This was never enforced in the system. So we decided that we were going to enforce it because we had some students who would purposely take advantage of that 10-day rule and would cut class, cut school. So we decided to enforce that 10-day rule, meaning if you missed 10 days, it would impact your grade. But to be fair to parents and students, we had at least 9 meetings before we initiated the plan. We had meetings during the school day, we had meetings on the weekend, we had meetings after school so we could share this information with parents and students before we acted. So when we did decide and implemented the program, some students who had A's ended up having a B or C because of their attendance. We had some folks who were very upset about that. But the great thing about it, when we did that and students saw that we were serious and holding them accountable, you saw a dramatic increase in student attendance. So I'm saying that to say when we put this rule in effect, we had parents upset, we had students upset, I had different political figures who were kind of upset initially, but once they started to see the results, it was easy kind of to keep that initiative in place because sometimes folks are upset initially, but once they see the positive impact, they're more on board with the decision. But I was not a popular principal for those 2 months when we went through that process.
All right, thanks.
Okay. What processes do you use to gather feedback on programs or initiatives? Can you give us a recent example of how you gathered feedback, for what purpose, and most importantly, what you did with the results?
I think one of the most important things that a school leader or a leader in any organization has to kind of focus on is just making sure they have ongoing communication with their staff. So we had we instituted a new walkthrough instrument in our system in Kansas City. Again, we have 34 schools in Kansas City right now. And what it meant is that principals were required to go in to classrooms at least 5 times during a given period and observe teacher instruction and provide feedback. We had some folks initially who were upset about that, so we decided to we put a survey out to all teachers in the system. We also had focus groups, and we met with all teachers in the system just to get their opinion on how things were going. And based on the feedback we received, some of the teachers felt like we were coming in the classrooms too much. So we did make a slight adjustment to that, but we still held teachers and principals accountable for going in the classroom. But we did listen and we did act, and we did make a change. So at the end of the day, sometimes you have to take the information received from feedback and make adjustments to kind of keep, because morale was starting to go in the opposite direction that we wanted it to go. So we did have to make some adjustment. We didn't eliminate the process. We did make adjustments. So surveys, focus groups, and just one-on-one conversations are the best way to achieve and receive feedback, in my opinion. And I think you have to have opportunities for everybody involved in the process to provide feedback. And I think the way we modeled that focus group today, that's just a perfect example. I met with every stakeholder group in this system today, and it was only one day.
Good evening. What is the one thing you would protect, no matter the objections, if there was a need to make a budget recommendation reduction to the board?
I would protect teachers' salary, to be honest with you. And I talked about it today. Teachers are probably the hardest working people. And I'm an assistant superintendent now, but I worked much harder as a teacher. I mean, I had to go home and plan lessons. I had to work on the weekends and find materials. I had to spend money to find incentives. So the one thing I would protect, and this is for any system I work in, not just Grand Rapids. If I don't get this job and I end up working somewhere else, I will always kind of protect teachers' salary and make sure that we didn't really make any cuts to staff as it relates to teachers, unless it's something dealing with poor professional performance or low performance. But teacher salary and teacher positions are something that we need to protect, unless it's something related to staff performance.
Under what circumstances would you consider eliminating an extracurricular or co-curricular program, and have you had to do this in the past? Conversely, are there any such programs that you advocated for expanding, and why?
Okay, so student achievement has to be the core of your school system. So the only way I would consider cutting any type of program if it has something to do with improving student achievement across the board. For instance, if we had a substantial number of students who were below grade level and we needed to hire more reading and math interventionists, I would be open to cutting a program, but not without talking to every stakeholder group involved on multiple occasions. I think when you make those type of decisions, you have to involve all stakeholder groups, and you have to talk to them not just once, but on multiple occasions before you make the decision, and just basically discuss the pros and cons. But it has been situations where I've been part of teams that we had to make decisions like that. For instance, when we had 3 different types of art classes in one of the situations. We had a graphic design class, a foundations of arts class, and another type of art class. So we did have to cut one art class, and it ended up saving us $100,000, but it allowed us to hire a reading instructional coach who did what I said in terms of that network support. They supported teachers in becoming better, and you saw gains in our graduation rate. Another thing that I put in that folder is just how when I was working in DC, we had the most improved graduation rate in the whole District of Columbia metro area based on the decisions we made and some of the feedback that I received from staff. So I am open to making cuts only when it's going to impact student achievement. Now, one of the big questions I received in the focus group is like, what is something that you hold sacred? I was lucky enough to be a principal of a school where we won 5 state championships in football and 2 in basketball, and it took the morale in that school from 10% to 140%. Nothing kind of improves morale like students seeing themselves as winners. So I would love to promote the sports program in Grand Rapids Public Schools. I think it does so much for the system when you are winning championships. And I know some folks may not feel this way, but we just won the Super Bowl in Kansas City, and everybody in the city is happy. Everybody is smiling. Everybody is happy. So sports does a whole lot for your system, and also the arts. So I don't mind focusing and spending more money in those 2 areas.
Please help us to understand how you have engaged the local community and government in your capacity as an educational leader. Throughout this process, what have you learned about our community? So throughout your time here today.
Okay, so I've always engaged the community, and I've always worked in systems that engage the community. We had to make difficult decisions, like putting in policies like closing schools. I talked about that last time. Changing the attendance requirements, changing grading systems, changing discipline policies. I've always been a person who believed in just engaging the community face-to-face through surveys, through one-on-one conversations, through home visits. So the one thing I kind of learned today is that true or false, there is some perception with some members of our community and stakeholders that we're not efficient to our highest ability as it relates to our communication with parents in the community. So if I am hired in this position, that's one thing I will make an immediate focus, just to make sure that parents in the community cannot say that we don't have processes and structures in place where we hear their concerns and we address their concerns. So I did that was a theme in all the focus groups today. The first 3 is that we need to make sure that we have things in place. And again, we do, from what I see online, there are things in place, but to change the perception, we had to just, I guess, do a little bit more so parents feel like they are heard and their concerns are acted upon.
Okay, regarding special education, how do you create an effective environment for inclusion while also meeting distinct needs of students?
Okay, so during my career, I always was sent to schools that were low performing, and if you talk to anybody in the schools that I worked in, they had kind of a label for our special education students, like they were the ones in the school in some cases who were creating issues as it related to discipline and also student performance academically. So one thing I learned to do as the leader of a school is to make sure that we treated all of our students the same. We provided all the same supports for every student in the building, and we're doing the same thing now in Kansas City with the 16 schools that I work with. We're making sure that we provide the same resources to every student in every school, regardless of their classification, special education, ELL. We're providing that same network support, the same type of resources to every student. So. And that was not something that was happening 2 years ago, even in Kansas City. So we made it a point to focus on our special ed population, making sure that we had the same expectations for those students that we had for all of our other students. And when I was a high school principal, I had a school that had a 33% population of special education students, one of the largest in the whole district. And you saw major gains with that population simply because we raised expectations for those students.
Yeah, just one of the reasons this question is asked is that there's been discussions about, given that there's like least restrictive environments having special ed students in the main classrooms, but how do you also impact the distinct needs of special ed? So I appreciate your answer, but more
the inclusion model, and
yeah.
I didn't respond to that part. So the inclusion model is something that we have in place in the current system I work in. When I was a principal, all of my teachers, we had self-contained rooms, and also we enforced the inclusion model. And the big issue with that is that you have to make sure that you adequately train your staff and teaching staff in terms of how you effectively provide instruction using that model. And that's been an issue across the country. So just making sure that teachers are trained in the effective practice of utilizing the inclusion model, because if you don't have teachers trained in that model, it's not effective. So just making sure that we have teachers who are trained adequately as it relates to the inclusion model. But I have seen some success using that model. We instituted now in the current system that I work in. And when I was a principal, I always had multiple inclusion classes in the schools I worked in. But the big thing with that is just making sure that all staff members involved are well trained and know their roles. You can't have two teachers in the room and one teacher doesn't know their role. Both teachers must know their role, and both teachers must be able to deliver quality instruction. There's no way the students must see both adults in that building or all the adults in that classroom as their school teaching. That's not the case in some situations.
Dr. Slade, during your career as an educator, what have you done to maintain a focus on staff morale for teams that you've led?
Staff morale is very important. If your staff does not feel valued or supported, they're not going to give 100% every day. And the way you make sure that staff feels supported is just honestly having an honest conversation with them, making sure that their concerns, good and bad, are heard. You also have to kind of plan and this is something I've learned working in Kansas City under Dr. Mark Waddell. He's great with this. Have fun activities planned. I talked about this in my last meeting, but we always have events and things in place to make sure that to intentionally focus on making sure that staff morale is always on the positive, even though we always, in most systems, you're going to have a few people who are not happy, but just making sure that we have events like staff get-togethers as a system. We have, honestly, and this works, we have intramural kickball games for teachers. We have basketball games. We have cookouts. We have that stuff on an ongoing basis to make sure that staff feels valued and they feel like a team. Also, again, the big thing is just making sure that teachers feel support as it relates to their daily professional responsibilities. And we address that with the network. So I think we put some of these things in place and also just make sure that teachers know that we value their opinions. You will see an increase in morale. But I will say the teachers I met today, everything I heard from them was positive.
Thank you.
So, can you tell us one of the most stressful situations you've experienced, aside from this one, as an educational leader? How do you handle personally stressful situations?
If you kind of look at my background, I've always been in situations that would be defined as stressful. I happen to work, when I worked in DC, I worked under, I'm not going to say the person's name, but I worked under a supervisor who 50 principals every year would be fired. If you didn't make the gains So it was like a do or die situation in terms of student achievement, and that's because she was so focused on outcomes and doing what was best for students. So if you didn't produce, you would be released from your job. So I would say the most stressful situation for me is when I was a principal working in DC, because you had to have 10-point gains in every area and in every subgroup, and if not, you had to kind of sit down with the supervisor and explain why you should not be released. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, but I will say it made me a much better educator, knowing that my students had to learn. They had to learn, they had to produce, we had to do what's best for them. So I will say my time in DC in that high accountability field was the most stressful, but it also was beneficial because now I feel like I'm an expert as it relates to improving student outcomes and just being an instructional leader and improving like graduation rates, attendance rates, and everything like that. And so that's how I learned to support teachers in that environment. Because if your teachers didn't feel supported, they would not work. It was not uncommon for my teachers to stay 2 hours after work during the week and come in. We had Saturday school every Saturday. I'm not talking about paid, so I'm talking about volunteer Saturday school. And I would say I would at least have 10 staff members who would come because they felt supported and they saw it as a team effort. So it was one of my most stressful situations, but also one of the greatest learning experiences and opportunities. But I will say the day was unique in the intensity of just moving from one focus group to another focus group. I will never forget that. I think just the day made me a better leader honestly, you will walk from one focus group of 50 into another focus group of 50 into another focus group of 50. That was a great experience today. So I think that's something, if whoever's watching has a leadership program, that's a great experience.
All right. What do you see?
Flores, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah,
Do you mind? We're going to move to number 12 for the sake of time.
no problem. How will you ensure high educational standards are set and clearly communicated and met?
I think one of the biggest jobs of the superintendent is just to raise expectations. You can never be satisfied. To be perfectly honest, sometimes since I've been in this, going through this process, I don't want anybody in this room to become complacent with the success that has happened in the past. So even though we've had great gains in this system, we could still do even better. So I think as a superintendent, you have to kind of raise expectations. That's why if you look at the goals, I said we should have a 90% goal for attendance. We should have a goal of always improving student achievement, which I think is in place. But the way you just raise standards and expectations just by setting an example of being a model. Can you repeat that question so I can make sure I answer it fully?
Yes, it was, how will you ensure high educational standards are set, clearly communicated, and met?
You have to monitor what you expect. So as a superintendent, I will constantly be in schools. I will constantly look at data. I will constantly discuss outcomes with the people responsible, and I will constantly, basically, again, like I said, meet with parents, stakeholder groups, just to see what's working well and what's not working so well. And I think that was done in 2012 with the previous superintendent. That's why you saw success. So whoever takes this role has to continue that. You also have to have a skill set and know what to do. I mean, you have to know how to move a school from a 70% graduation rate to an 80 or 90% graduation rate. And that's something that everybody doesn't know how to do. So you have to have that skill set to know what needs to be done and also monitor what needs to be done.
Thank you very much.
What role does the superintendent take to ensure that athletics and the arts are education-based and utilized to support the whole child outside the classroom?
You have to be passionate about athletics and the arts. And I'm a very competitive person, and I don't even work for the system yet, but it upsets me that we are not winning championships in some of our sporting fields, and that may not be the best answer, but you have to be passionate and you have to want to see those things happen. Also, you want to see students participate simply because it makes you a better student. And research clearly shows that students who take part in sports, students who are on an art club or who participate in plays, those students do much better than students who are not involved. But by me firsthand being fortunate and blessed to work in a school, again, where we won multiple state championships, again, that's a magical situation where I tied that into, called it, we had to create a culture of excellence, meaning if we could give 100% and win these football and basketball championships, I need to see the same thing in the classroom. And if you look at that data related to that school, and I talked about it today in the focus groups, if you look at the data related to that school, it doesn't just say we improved, it says we improved more than any other school in the whole DC metro area. And it was because of outstanding results in sports. We had plays, we had theater. We just had students who believed they were the best in the world. And by doing that, and by tying all that together, you had students who came in for the most part and gave 100% every day. And as the principal, I kind of set that tone and created that mindset in that building.
Kind of leads into this one. In your judgment, what are the 3 most critical things a good principal does?
A principal has to be visible. A principal cannot sit in the office. A principal has to be visible and know their students by name. And I saw that today. I saw very visible principals. I saw principals who the staff seemed to appreciate. I saw principals who wanted to be better. I saw principals who were honest. Also, a principal has to be an instructional leader, meaning the principal has to be able to go into a classroom and help a teacher become better. That has to be a prerequisite for our principals. And if you're not an instructional leader now, which is sometimes the case, you have to be open to becoming an instructional leader. And I think that's the job of the superintendent and the people in the role of supervising principals. Also, a principal has to be an advocate for their schools. I met a principal today, and I don't have this job. He was telling me what he needed and how I could support him. So being visible, being an instructional leader, being strong in the area of operations. And what I mean by that, you have to be able to manage your building. You have to be able to manage the budget. You have to be able to make sure that students adhere to rules and regulations. And you also have to just, again, be an advocate for doing what's best for the students in your building, even if it's something that may be against what the mainstream, the board or myself is saying. As long as you could kind of explain and discuss it and be professional, I'm open to principals who sometimes may push back on what we're saying is right if they think it's a better way.
How do you provide the oversight and/or lead others who have direct responsibilities in a district this size? Please specify how you would hold others accountable for delivering the mission of the district.
So you cannot hold people accountable if you can't do the job yourself. I used to have assistant principals who would try to tell a teacher something about managing their class, but they couldn't manage the cafeteria period they were assigned to. This is real conversation. So you cannot hold somebody accountable unless it's something that you have knowledge of or you could do yourself. One thing I will say I have done extremely well has been successful as a principal, so that way I can hold principals accountable. I've been extremely successful as a principal supervisor. I can hold that level accountable. So the fact that I have some credibility and success, and one of the reasons, again, I added that information in those folders, because I could sit up here and say anything. I could say anything during an interview, but one thing I like to talk about is how my body of work reflects of that what I'm saying is true. So the reason I could hold folks accountable is because I know this job. I've been doing it for 30 years, and I've had some success, and I've actually done the work, so I could hold everybody that works in the system accountable, but also I will be fair.
If we were to ask your direct reports or administrative team to describe your qualities or characteristics in 3 adjectives, what would they say? Also, how about your teachers, your classified staff, or board members?
Okay, so if you call any reference to anybody that's ever worked with me, one of the things they will say is that I was probably one of the hardest working people that they've ever come in contact with. They will say that. They will say if you give Dr. Slade a goal, he's going to exceed that goal. Like when I became a principal, my boss, and I don't want to say her name, but she was one of the most effective people I've ever worked with. She charged us with improving graduation rates. I was brand new to high school. I had never worked in a high school. I had not been in a high school since I graduated. I was an elementary and middle school principal. But we ended up having the most improved graduation rates in that whole, and I'm not talking about just DC, but the whole DC, Maryland, Virginia metro area for 3 years. And that happened by me first talking to all the stakeholders, because I didn't know how to do it. How do you move graduation rates? And teachers and counselors and parents told me what we needed to do, and we acted on that. So being extremely hardworking, listening, and also kind of wanting to win and do the best. Whoever takes on this role is kind of a challenge, because you have to improve you have to really go from good to great, and that's a challenge. So hardworking, a great listener, and also they would say I'm kind of competitive in a positive way. And also they would say that I'm fair, and also I model what I say. I never ask somebody to do something that I would not do. to myself. And I'm also not a show and tell type. I don't put on a show. I don't do song and dance. Whatever I say is what I mean and what I've actually done. And that's one thing when I interview folks, I always tell them, bring me documentation to support everything you're saying. If you can't bring me documentation, then it doesn't mean it happened. And again, that's one of the things I don't really like about interviews, because some people are much better at presenting themselves, but sometimes what they say may not be true. I'm kind of the opposite. What I say, I'm going to speak on how I perform, and I really have done much better. So those are the things my colleagues would say about me. And they also would kind of say that one thing that might not be as negative, I need to learn how to have more fun on the job. I'm kind of serious, but I am learning and getting better with that with age. I played kickball. I was in the kickball competition. I hurt my foot. I did the escape room. I did the art and paint. These are all things that we do for team building across the system. I did the art, sip and paint, or something to that degree. So I did all those things, and I'm weighing. We had a video contest for the Super Bowl. We actually won that. So I'm becoming better with that. So that would be one thing that my staff would probably say about me. And my students would say that Dr. Slade will give 110% in anything that I treated my students like they were my children, honestly. I spent thousands of dollars every year. My wife would get mad with me when she was still here, because I can't see students suffering. I always worked with students who did not have. My son didn't appreciate going to McDonald's. He would go to McDonald's and stuff like that. I would have students, when I believed in bringing food in school and rewarding students, and they would be so happy with the McDonald's meals that it just made me do it every day. So those are the things my staff would say and students would say. I always wanted students to say that when they become 40 years old, who was the best principal you ever had? I want them to say me. I want my principals to say, who was the best principal supervisor you ever had? I want them to say me. And if I become a superintendent, this will be hard in this system, honestly, because you had a legend before me. I would want some folks to say, who was the best superintendent you worked with? I would want them to say me. And that's just the straight truth.
Thank you.
Okay. So you've done a marathon today.
Oh.
So this is the last question, and that is, do you have any questions for us?
Again, this has been a great experience for me. Even if I'm not hot, I will never forget the experience. I appreciate it's been a class act all the way. I was given a Grand Rapids shirt that I will keep forever. That honestly, class act all the way. It's a gentleman that's been with me all day. I don't see this gentleman in the back. He has been a great host. This board has been great in the way I feel like I've been treated well. And that's the same kind of feeling I want teachers to have. I want teachers to lead work every day, feel like they've been treated well. I've been treated like a king in this process, so I do want to say that. And I also want to say again, just when you are a leader, your footprints should remain. And again, if you talk to that was a great question. If you talk to any school or any system I worked in, they will tell you that Dr. Slade's footprints are still in this building 10 years after he left. If I leave Kansas City today, you will have folks saying that Dr. Slade put things in place that are still here to this day. So if I am lucky enough to be hired for this position, my goal is to just leave some footprints and have my picture on this wall. And when people walk by, they will remember these are the things that Dr. Slade worked with the team to put in place. So again, just thank you for this whole experience. It's been great. And again, I will keep that shirt. I'm gonna keep talking about it. That shirt was just a big thing to me. So small things like that go a long way. We need to make sure we do the same thing for our staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Madam President, could I just thank Dr. Slade publicly for having submitted to us a superintendent's pre-entry and entry plan. It was very comprehensive. I took time to read it before we met, and I was one of the advocates to suggest that for equal play and equal footing that you provide that. So
Can I just commend this board on one thing? I have never seen such a transparent process. The reason I brought in that plan is because I actually looked at the video and I heard you discussing the plan, and somebody said it would be wise for Dr. Slade to complete a plan. And somebody said they didn't think it was fair. So for you to have that kind of transparency, honestly, I've never seen that level of transparency before. So keep doing that no matter what. Again, whoever you hire, that's the kind of transparency you want, where nobody can say, and having those focus groups today, nobody can say that they did not have a voice in this process. So again, I want to commend you for that. And I don't know if you know this, I've taken part in 2 superintendent programs, and we have watched the videos of this process in the past. So just know that this video today may be watched by superintendent classes in the future. So just know you are setting a model for how boards should function and operate. So thank you.
Thank you.
flattery is commended.
Hello. Thank you. We are going to go ahead and get started with our second interview. So if we could please have everyone join us. Good evening. Welcome, Dr. Pruitt. Thank you for being with us today. We are pleased. If, I'm sorry, I'm just going to take a moment. If you do have conversations that you would like to carry on, please join each other in the lobby, but we still have two more interviews to do, and we want to move quickly. Thank you.
That's a good teacher's voice there.
So thank you for being with us today. The board is pleased to have you as one of the finalists for the superintendency at Grand Rapids Public Schools, and we are looking forward to learning more about you tonight. Before we get started, I want to make you aware of what to expect. The first thing is that all candidates will be asked the same questions and go through the same process this evening. You will have 15 minutes to provide your prepared presentation to respond to the prompt, how can we accelerate learning and close the achievement gap for all learners within GRPS? Your interview will be 60 minutes and include 17 questions. At the conclusion of each interview, there is an opportunity for you to ask any questions that you have of the board. All right, we're going to get started.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Before I begin the presentation, I'd first like to thank Ms. Cheney for driving me around all day today. Really good conversation, very candid about the strengths and growth areas of the district, so I really appreciate her today. I'd also like to thank Mr. Rousey at Union High School, Mr. Perez at Burton, and Mr. Standifer at Mullock Park for their hospitality and showing me their schools, showing off their schools, and making me a little bit more knowledgeable about what's going on in Grand Rapids. Last but not least, I'd like to thank the principals, teachers, and ESPs in the focus group, along with the parents and community, and those tough students today. They asked the toughest questions today, so really enjoyed meeting everyone that was representative in the district today. And so throughout my career, there have been these key beliefs that have guided me from the classroom up until my position today. And I think these beliefs are particularly aligned to the values and beliefs of the district, and are connected to the district's desire to accelerate learning and closing the achievement gap. In my initial review of the district's data, these are the 12 areas that I focused on, and the district has been really good around identifying strengths and growth areas. Strengths, just a preview, strengths are around pride in staff, the diversity within the district, and the options and pathways that are being offered in the district. But also being very transparent around the growth areas with regards to staffing, academics, and curriculum. And so taking all that information in and based off what I learned today and looking at the data, how do we move the district forward? We begin with the standards that the district have already set. I've highlighted some words that stood out to me when reading the district's mission, vision, and beliefs. And so all students, world-class performing district, highest quality, top educational talent, and then again, all children, and then potential in the belief statement. And so to create a system that is responsive to the potential and needs of all students, attracts top educational talent, and becomes a world-class performing district with all students and schools offering high-quality options for the entire community, there must be a shift in thinking about the impact of equality and equity. And so I'm sure that many of you have seen this type of graphic before, demonstrating the differences between equality and equity. So to sum it up, equality is basically sameness. We're going to give everyone the same thing and hope that they're able to reach the goals that the district has set. Versus equity, equity is about fairness. It ensures that every person gets what he or she needs. And so in our case, we're talking about students, but we also have to consider the impact on adults. And so when we talk about fairness, are we giving not only students everything that they need, but are we also giving the adults that serve them everything they need to get the job done? Achieving equity is a systemic challenge that needs to be met at all system levels, from the classroom to the school building level to the district level. There are different responsibilities for ensuring equity so that each child's success is supported. My goal is to support students moving forward, school leaders moving forward, and teachers moving forward by giving them the tools that they need to get the job done. One way to accelerate learning is through targeted universalism.
What is the most effective and sustainable policy response to problems in our society? Universal approaches are widely used in order to package policies for broad appeal. Universal policies such as Social Security and minimum wage provide the same benefits or minimum protections to everyone, regardless of status or group membership. But by treating everyone the same, universal approaches can't root out group-based discrimination. It may actually deepen inequality between groups rather than reduce it. And by providing benefits or protections to everyone, resources that could be targeted to groups worse off instead flow to those who are better off. In contrast to universalism, targeted approaches are commonly used. Targeted policies provide benefits or protections based on group membership or status. SNAP, the food stamp program, conditions benefits on income level. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires public accessibility for disabled groups. And affirmative action focuses on historically disadvantaged groups. Targeted approaches are vulnerable to the critique that they unfairly favor constituent groups over the public good by directing resources to marginalized groups who are already subjected to unfair stereotypes. But universal and targeted approaches are false choices. There is a third way, targeted universalism. Targeted universalism means setting universal goals that can be achieved through targeted approaches. This approach targets the various needs of each group while reminding us that we are all part of the same social fabric. This can be accomplished by following 5 steps. First, set a universal goal. For example, 100% proficiency in 8th grade math. Second, measure how the overall population fares relative to the universal goal. In this example, we might discover that only 80% of 8th graders are proficient in 8th grade math. Third, measure the performance of population segments relative to the universal goal. So although 80% of all 8th graders are proficient, we might find that only 70% of Latinx students are proficient. Fourth, understand how structures and other factors support or impede groups' progress toward the universal goal. For our Latinx students, classroom instruction materials and lessons designed for English speakers may impede learning, including math proficiency. Finally, implement targeted strategies so that each and every group can achieve the universal goal based upon their needs and circumstances. This may take the form of ESL-specific math tutoring for our Latinx students, while another group may require a completely different strategy to achieve the same universal goal. Targeted universalism rejects a blanket universal, which may be indifferent to the reality that different groups are situated differently relative to the institutions and resources of society. By aspiring toward shared universal goals, targeted universalism empowers targeted strategies capable of achieving those goals. while moving us beyond concerns over disparities alone and toward our highest aspirations for all.
So targeted universalism applies to everyone. Different student groups have different needs. Teachers serving different student groups have different needs. And we would be able to accelerate their learning by establishing universal goals, measuring overall student performance, measuring student group performance, establishing a system, structure, and policy that support all students reaching those goals, and identifying specific targeted strategies, not only for the students, but also for our school leaders and our teachers. And so what processes support this system to close the achievement gap if we have this structure around targeted universalism? This puzzle piece represents the potential strategies to eliminate performance gaps between all students. The next few slides that I'll be sharing with you outline potential strategies over the next 3+ years to eliminate the achievement gap. In year one, these strategies to eliminate the achievement gap are focused on leading vision, systems, and people. In year one, around vision, establish commitment to methods of continuous improvement at district and building levels. If we are committed to school leaders at their buildings engaging in continuous improvement, we have to do the same thing at central office. Build relationships with key stakeholders in the community to support district vision and coherence. Create network improvement communities at building and district levels to examine data relevant to their work and identifying opportunities for improvement. And so NICs are different from PLCs because NICs are going to focus on data relevant to the student groups, the schools, the system that we're trying to change. Use the work of the NICs to update and improve the district's strategic plan, as well as developing people through their participation in the NICs. And so if you notice at the bottom, I have an arrow that has 3 key areas that I believe would continue throughout my tenure as superintendent: social and emotional support, family and community engagement, recruit and retain highly effective leaders and teachers. And then start targeting high leverage change for year 2 with a focus on developing systems and personnel. In year 2, we're going to analyze and make recommendations for essential staffing, for academic and SEL supports, create a priority teacher staffing and retention model. What can we do differently to recruit and retain teachers within the district and identify pathways for our staff? Establish collaborative school support. And so as we look at how our school leaders are being supported currently, are there ways to extend that support to other school leaders in the district to help their peers? Development of equity framework. And so I've received a lot of questions today from all stakeholders around this concept of equity. And so there seems to be a commitment and a desire to move equity forward within the district. And so we can begin engaging in developing a framework around equity that addresses all areas within the district. Begin implementing targeted high leverage changes, improve the data capacity at district level, our use of instructional rounds, and how we begin using the ILT or continue to use the ILT. Again, continue using the NICs as a source of professional learning and collaborative improvement of results, and continue to build relationships with relevant stakeholders. Year 3 and beyond, to what extent, so this is a continuous progress monitoring at all levels, collaboratively analyze the evidence on to what extent does the system reflect a shared vision of commitment to equity and continuous improvement at all levels? To what extent are the systems in place and working to support the vision effectively? Again, the systems are going to drive the change that we want in the district. And then to what extent are these systems developing the people within them so they can make these systems work and have students be very successful when they leave us. The last thing I want to leave you with is a quote from Andrew Carnegie, and this really sums up my leadership and my commitment around accelerating learning and closing the achievement gap. Teamwork is the ability to work together toward a common vision, the ability to direct individual accomplishments towards organizational objectives. It is a fuel that allows common people to attain uncommon results. And so I believe that my strength over the past 22 years has been my ability to work with a team of people committed, a team of talented people committed to getting results and improving outcomes for students. Based on what I've seen today, we have a talented, an array of talented people that work for the district. And then it would be my job to come in, learn as much as I can from them and learn about the district and make this team work better to move the district forward. Thank you.
Turn my timer off so it doesn't. Okay. So we're going to jump right into the round of questions that we have set up for you. For this second round, board members can follow up with follow-up questions if they have them. All right, so our first question is, what did you find most interesting about your visit to our buildings? What was your impression of what you saw or heard? And please be honest or direct with the good and possibly not so good.
I didn't see anything bad today, but I think what struck me the most was the passion from the superintendent, the principals that I met. Specifically, their connectedness to their school, their community, and their desire to improve the district. In particular, Mr. Standiford was really passionate about, this is someone that is a product of GRPS and has demonstrated a commitment to improving outcomes for kids. And so he was very specific around, he wants to improve how we engage the community, how transparent we are with regards to our data, and then also how we provide supports to principals. And then, what was really striking about my conversation with Mr. Standiford was he wants a superintendent that is going to deliver a positive message about what's going on in the district and keep that message going throughout their tenure. And so I think that was very striking to me. Also with Mr. Perez at Burton, he was very committed to cultural competence on his campus and improving SEL supports for his staff, but he's also committed to helping his teachers get better at teaching. And so he identified specific areas around how teachers can deliver instruction better through questioning, task development, and then also data analysis. Mr. Rossi at Union High School shared with me his desire for a little bit more autonomy with regards to budget, and then wanting some help around how schools are funded. In my conversations with the kids at the schools, they were just really happy. Every school seemed like a happy place to be, and they enjoyed what they were doing in class. And the teachers were very cordial and open to having a conversation about what they were doing in the class.
Dr. Pruitt, how would you determine the strengths, capabilities of our key administrative staff? Please also share how you might approach the difficult task of restructuring, reassigning, or releasing individuals as necessary.
So with the entry plan that I shared with everyone with the first interview, I would go about assessing central office with meeting with each department head. I think it's very important that I have a clear understanding of what each member, each chief does within their department. One, to ensure that there's not overlap in the work that's being done. And then also looking at if they have them, strategic plans for each department. And then also with the strategic plan, looking at their budgets to make sure that the funding that is supporting that department is lined up with the priorities that they've identified. The way we would approach, if we had to downsize central office, I would work hand in hand with HR and legal to ensure that, one, we're very respectful, but then we also are messaging to the board members and the community why we're doing what we're doing. The important information that I think will be vital to the community is, if we're downsizing, where are those funds going if we're letting people go? And if we're going to let people go, then we have to ensure that those funds reach back down to the schools to support students and teachers.
Thank you very much, sir.
All right, first I want to show my appreciation for you using a sociologist to discuss equity. So John Powell is one of my favorite sociologists, and he has a great analysis of this equity issue, so appreciate it. Think about one or two of the most difficult initiatives that you have implemented as an educational leader, and then discuss how you built consensus around those initiatives, and if you could give us some examples, that would help.
So I had the opportunity to implement two initiatives.
Oh, go ahead.
Reading by 3 and Power Up. Reading by 3 was an initiative where we wanted all of our students to read by 3rd grade. The challenge was shifting our framework around literacy to balanced literacy meant that we had to give the resources to our primary teachers, in addition to professional development. If you know anything about balanced literacy, is not that we can just give teachers resources and expect them to deliver a balanced literacy a reading block at a high level within the first 10 weeks of school. The challenging part about that was continuing the professional development throughout the school year to ensure that the different components of the reading block were being implemented with fidelity, and then also identifying where we could provide support to teachers and principals around guided reading lessons, the libraries, implementing writing in the classroom. And so it was an ongoing initiative that didn't just happen in 1 year. We had to expand how we looked at professional development and continue the professional learning series for our school leaders and teachers. And then as people improved, we differentiated the support based on where they were in the implementation of reading. The second initiative was around Power Up. Power Up was a one-to-one initiative for all of our high schools. The challenge is we allowed students to take their laptops home, and they always didn't make their way back to the school, and because we were using the laptops for instruction, if the students didn't bring their laptops to school, then we had to figure out alternative ways to ensure that if the teacher is using that as a mode of teaching a lesson, alternative ways for the student to continue to participate in the lesson.
Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? Could you just share how you built consensus around those initiatives?
And so consensus was built around over communicating the expectation of reading by 3. And so before we implemented reading by 3, we talked with the school leaders, we talked with teachers about what was coming. And then we actually delivered professional learning before the materials came. And then we also had curriculum to support the implementation of reading by 3. With Power Up, we had an infrastructure within the district where we had all of our curriculum, we had pre-K through 12th grade curriculum online. And so it involved ensuring that teachers knew how to access the content through through their pieces of technology and understood how to deliver lessons using that technology before we actually rolled it out to students. And so over communicating the expectation, providing professional learning, and then continuing that professional learning and monitoring throughout the implementation of both programs.
Thank you. What processes do you use to gather feedback on programs or initiatives? Can you give us a recent example of how you gathered feedback, for what purpose, and most importantly, what you did with the results?
And so when we implemented the Achieve 180 initiative in Houston, one of the most important components of that was getting feedback from students, teachers, and parents. And so we engaged in a series of delivering surveys to all three stakeholders around the implementation of Achieve 180. So for teachers, we were really interested in the amount of support that they were receiving from the teacher development specialists, in addition to the support that they were getting from the weekly professional learning. And so every week we would survey teachers and get feedback on the effectiveness of the professional learning. If in the data that we reviewed, the professional learning was not as effective as we thought it was, then we would make adjustments on our end in the academic departments to deliver more effective professional learning the next week. With regards to principals, we would deliver professional learning for our principals every week, and again, use that feedback that we received from them to adjust how we didn't call them directors, we called them school support officers, how school support officers supported and pushed into schools to coach and develop principals around the particular components of either literacy or math focus that we had around Achieve 180. With our students, we were particularly interested in the wraparound services that we were offering and providing to all of our schools. And so it wasn't a full-blown 5 essentials survey as far as how they're feeling about being in school, but we took their feedback and used it to make adjustments to how the wraparound service specialists were supporting the schools, and then also it caused us to look more deeply at our data around behavior and attendance with regards to why students are coming to school or are not coming to school.
What is the one thing you would protect, no matter the objections, if there were a need to make budget reductions recommendations to the board?
You have to protect the classroom. And so it's really important. The teachers already have a hard job. And if we take teachers out of schools and increase classroom size, that means that we're not being as effective as we possibly could be because we're increasing class size. And so I think that everything that I do, every conversation that I'm having with all of you is around protecting the classroom and protecting the integrity of the teacher's ability to teach effective lessons.
Under what circumstances would you consider eliminating an extracurricular or co-curricular program, and have you had to do this in the past? Conversely, are there any such programs that you advocated for expanding, and why?
So the only reason I would recommend eliminating an extracurricular program is if we don't have the student population to support the program. I believe that if students want program X and we have enough students to support that program, we should provide them every opportunity to participate. Programs that I've looked to expand in my role. I've been really passionate about expanding AP, dual credit, and dual enrollment in our high schools in Chicago. I think I spoke to this last time, but the research is clear that if we provide students the opportunity to participate in AP, even if they aren't able to get a passing score, the benefits outweigh them not being able to get the score. And so I think I know providing more opportunities around college prep courses, also expanding CTE options for our students. This is one of the questions that I got from the students today around CTE. And specifically, the question was around, what about the kids that don't want to go to college? And they're thinking that the district's focus is students only going to college. And so I think that I would look to expand our post-secondary options and programming for our students in high school.
Okay, please help us to understand how you have engaged the local community and government in your capacity as an educational leader. Also, throughout this process that you've had with us today, can you tell us what you have learned about our community?
So in my current role, I have the opportunity to work with community action councils, primarily on the south and west side of Chicago. And these are groups of community members that come together that want to advocate for the schools within a geographic region in their community. This is a really good opportunity, one, to communicate initiatives and programs that the district is rolling out, but then also to provide, and what I've done is provide a state of the schools every year for the community action councils related to the group of schools that they are over, as far as within their geographic area. I also have the opportunity to work with aldermen in Chicago, so that within the different wards. And so with the aldermen, they have a particular interest in a school's programming, or they have funding that they can offer schools, or they just have questions or concerns. I regularly meet with the aldermen that are in Chicago with regards to improving, expanding programs for our schools. What I learned today, talking with your team here, I think it was clear that there's a good relationship, from what I understand, with City Hall and the commissioners. They have an interest in seeing the district do well. I learned about, someone described Grand Rapids as their 4 quadrants in Grand Rapids. And so I think that was related to some of the equity questions that I received today. And so I think that there's a lot of work to do with regards to, one, what does equity mean for this board, for this district? And then how does that play out in how we fund schools, the types of programs that we deliver to our schools, and the resources that we provide to our school leaders, teachers, and students.
Regarding special education, how do you create an effective environment for inclusion while also meeting distinct needs of students?
So I got this question today with the central office staff, and so I'm gonna tell you the same thing I told your team here in central office. I got schooled about special ed when I was a first-year principal. I was lucky enough to have a special ed teacher pull me aside and talk to me about the importance of special education, and also point out to me that just because a student has an IEP does not mean that they can't learn. or that they can't be successful. And so to speak to your question around the structure and my expectations around special education, I think we have to consider special education, it's still education. They're just receiving different types of supports to meet their goals within their IEP. And we should not treat them differently just because they have an IEP.
All right, Dr. Pruitt, during your career as an educator, how have you focused on staff morale, and what specifically have you done to address it?
So staff morale, I think is directly related to the leader that's leading the staff. And so I think that resources that are provided to staff, I think supports that are provided to staff, I think the environment and culture that staff work in directly tie into morale. And so I think, again, research points out that, teachers rarely leave a district because of pay. They leave because of the leader that they're working for. And so I think that if we, and the way I've addressed this from being a principal to being a deputy into my current role is, one, you have to build solid relationships with the people that you're working with. You have to be responsive to their needs. You have to be willing to receive feedback, both positive and critical feedback about what you're doing to support them, and about the programs and initiatives that you're pushing out, and how you're supporting schools within the district. And so nothing is worse than working with someone that doesn't acknowledge the good work that you're doing or the impact that you may be having on another adult or students that you're working for. And so in my role, in my different roles, it's been a mixture of, one, solid relationships with the people that I'm working with, being responsive to their needs, identifying ways to support their career development and upward mobility within the district, and ensuring that there's a positive culture and climate around where everyone is able to work together towards that common goal.
That's great. I probably should go back and ask that second question again for special ed. I'm sorry, I should have asked this earlier, but I did this with the first candidate, and I feel I should give you a chance to respond to this. So going back to the question on special ed and inclusion, we are interested in how you would look at the idea of balancing resources with inclusive classrooms, but also with distinct needs. So the inclusion model of special education versus distinct needs.
So I believe in, when appropriate, students should be in their least restrictive environment. And so, depending upon the student's IEP, if possible, they should be in the gen ed class with their gen ed peers. And I think with regards to pushing in, I think how the district structures their IEPs and the how they structure their special ed program dictates the ability for co-teaching models around special education versus having standalone classrooms for students with IEPs. And so when possible, students should be in their least restrictive environment. And if that least restrictive environment is the gen ed classroom, that's where I would expect the students to be.
Thank you.
Dr. Pruitt, go ahead. Can you tell us one of the most stressful situations you have experienced as an educational leader? And how did you handle personally stressful situations?
The most stressful, in Chicago, we're experiencing unfortunate increase in inappropriate behavior between adults and students and students. And there's been an uptick over the past year and a half since I've been back. And so it's been stressful because we have schools with adults that aren't protecting kids. And when we have a breakdown in our system where adults aren't protecting kids, then that's a problem. And trying to figure out how to ensure that we're, one, selecting the right people to put in front of our kids as teachers, selecting the right people to put in front of our kids as coaches, putting the right people in front of our kids as school leaders. That's been very stressful over the past year and a half, because as we pull people out, similar to what you're experiencing with being able to identify talent, those leave gaps in schools, and it's been hard to find teachers and school leaders to replace to fill those gaps, which means students suffer academically. And so figuring out how to, with my presentation, continue accelerating learning and close the achievement gap, it's hard to do that when you don't have teachers or school leaders in the building to push the initiatives that you want pushed in the schools.
But just following up again, how do you handle personally stressful situations? How do you handle them?
So I believe self-care is really important. And so the way I deal with stress, one, you have to have someone that you're able to talk to about what you're going through, depending upon within the position that you're holding. And so I have a very supportive network of people in similar roles that I have. In addition to, of course, my wife that I can talk to, but people that experience the same thing that I'm experiencing in similar roles, being able to talk to them. I have coaches that I'm able to talk to. And then, again, part of the self-care is identifying how to be reflective, how to go to the activity that, whether it be walking on the lake, riding a bike, boxing, but self-care is part of dealing with stress, and then also talking out the problem with the people that are connected to you and closest to that problem.
Dr. Pruitt, how will you ensure high educational standards are set, clearly communicated, and met?
Would you repeat that one more time?
How will you ensure that high educational standards are set, clearly communicated, and met?
And so similar to what I showed you around target universalism, we have to have data and be transparent, not only with the board, but with the community around where exactly we are with regards to student performance. And then based off where we are with regards to student performance, then we set those goals. The board sets the goals around how we want students to perform. It's clearly articulated by continuing to talk about the goals, the vision, the mission, and the strategy around reaching those goals with regards to the goals that have been set around student performance. But then also the way we ensure that they're met. Right now, the district has 3 different ways of measuring progress for students in the district with MAP. Administered 3 times a year, potentially 3 times a year is not required. The way we ensure that the student goals are met would be to, one, identify what's an infrastructure around assessment and data that we can establish across the entire district to monitor student progress towards those goals. If we aren't on the right trajectory with regards to meeting those student goals, then we make adjustments through support or intervention from central office around how we're supporting those schools. So that's academics. With regards to setting goals, with regards to central office, as a superintendent, I'm meeting, I would plan on meeting with every department chief around, one, their strategic plan, the goals and priorities embedded within their strategic plan, and then we would be meeting quarterly around, are they reaching their goals and they're statusing those goals throughout the entire school year. And so meeting with the cabinet members of the department chiefs based on their goals, and then quarterly meeting with them to status their goals. And again, if they're not meeting their goals with regards to the budget department, HR department, then we're making adjustments to our strategy to ensure that are going to meet those goals that we set at central office and at the school level.
Thank you.
Okay. How does the superintendent ensure that both athletics and the arts are utilized to support the whole child and meet educational goals?
So again, I learned a lot about athletics today with regards to what's possible at our high schools. And so the way we support athletics and the arts is if a school is able to have those programs, we give them those resources that they need to have the programs. Again, this isn't based off the adult needs. It's based off of if there's interest from our students from elementary to high school, we provide those opportunities for kids to participate in those programs. One, to support the academics, but then two, to support them as learners. I'm a true believer in that athletics and the arts are connected to how students engage teachers, engage one another at the school level.
Thank you very much.
In your judgment, what are the 3 most critical things a good principal does?
Build relationships with teachers, families, and students. They look at data. They look at data and use data to make informed decision making. And they hold people accountable for expectations set for student learning.
How do you provide the oversight and/or lead others who have direct responsibilities in the district this size? Specifically, how would you hold others accountable for delivering the mission of the district?
Could you repeat that one more time, please?
How would you provide the oversight and/or lead others who have the district responsibilities for a district this size? Direct responsibilities, I'm sorry. And specifically, how would you hold others accountable for delivering the mission of the district?
And so similar to working with the department chiefs around, once they've established the goals and priorities for their departments, oversight involves having, again, status checks with central office staff around the goals that they've set. Particularly, and it's not necessarily an issue of, we're bringing in everyone and we're putting their data up, but it does involve a department looking at their data relative to what they're responsible for and monitoring that throughout the entire school year. Oversight involves if they're not meeting those expectations or meeting the goals that they've set throughout the school year, we're identifying intervention for them, identifying additional supports for that program, for that leader with regards to the department that they're leading within the district.
If we were to ask your direct reports or administrative team to describe your qualities or characteristics in 3 adjectives, what would they say?
So I really think that the people that work with me would say that although I look really serious on the outside, that I'm really approachable. I am focused, and I'm supportive. Both of them and of their school, based off based on getting the best out of the kids that we're serving.
Okay. So today,
You did teachers.
Nope, yeah. So today has been a marathon. This is your last question
Okay.
of the day. And that is just to find out if you have any questions for us.
Absolutely. So again, thank you for inviting me back. Really enjoyed today meeting everyone. Two questions that I'm really interested in. What partnerships need to be enhanced or established for the new superintendent?
Could you ask that again?
What partnerships need to be enhanced or established for the district? So I heard a lot from some of our nonprofit partners at the focus group. I also heard a lot about the community college partnership with the district. Are there any other partnerships that you think we need to explore or enhance to improve services for our students?
I guess I'll take a stab. I will say when we think about social emotional learning and mental health needs with students, there's maybe a capacity issue for the district to appropriately address those things. So there could be some partnership opportunities in that regard with community agencies and whatnot.
I'd like to offer, certainly just from my perspective, I can't speak for everyone here, but I really see that there's a need for development of corporate partnerships and opportunities for internships for our students. I think that if we want to integrate the students into this community, into the workforce, that we need to expose them at an early age into those internship opportunities that I would hope that we could develop. So I see that as an area that needs some improvement and would offer great opportunities to provide future employment and certainly pre-employment experiences for our students.
Thank you.
I actually would like to expound on that as well. I think there is room to develop and reach out a partnership with our parents and community that are less engaged. I think sometimes when people don't show up, we assume that they don't have any thoughts about the process. And I think that is a partnership that can be further developed.
Thank you. And so I'm actually going to put one of the questions you asked me back on you. What role would you like equity to take in the district? And so I was asked a question about what I thought equity was, but I think that it's really a partnership in us developing the definition. But I'm really interested in what role does equity take or look like within the district?
Right now, I think that has become one of our number one issues, and I think there are things afoot now to address those issues, and we're going to do many of the things that you suggested as far as focus groups and finding out from parents and teachers what it is that we need to do to make things better for kids. But it's going to be done professionally for us, so we'll get a professional report.
I think a general answer, and of course I'm speaking as an individual, but we've had a lot of discussions around equity. The role that equity should play in the district is that it should be a part of every system. It should be a part of every program. It should be ingrained, and that we understand the work that's going to take, the commitment that it's going to take. But our administration, our staff, our teachers have been a part of these conversations, and we really want to get to a point where it's not built as an aside, but it is ingrained throughout the complete process.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that there has been for years now serious conversations and professional development and considerations about how to create more equity. I mean, but I think that we will need to work on some of the structures. For instance, it's one way to create equity is to make our theme schools more accessible, which is really very important, and I think it's been very important. And there have been lots of initiatives over the last few years to make our theme schools more accessible. But a consequence of that is that it means that to some extent, those kids that are leaving neighborhood schools are then not available in the neighborhood schools. And so we have to, and I just think that there are structures that make it challenging, and and I think that's it's not so much the knowledge or professional development around the meaning of equity. It's more of, how do we challenge the structures that are barriers to equity? And I think that you recognize the 4 quadrants of the city. How do we get a really exciting program that at Ottawa Hills High School, which is here on the southeast side, to be attractive for students from the northeast side or from another part of the city, because then that would create equity. It would create students exchanging and going across boundaries. So there's some, but I would say that there's, probably, and I know people when I look out in the room, there's community people who are ready to work on that. And are already working with us on that issue, but I think that it's hard work. We're not at the place where we're talking about it. Now we're at the place of really digging into some serious structures that are impediments to it. So,
And I would just add that I feel like our board is really excited about that work, and that we're moving it into our subcommittees. And just to kind of follow what President Grant said, just making the equity work be something that is part of every conversation that we have, and that we are living in everything we do. So
That was my last question. Thank you very much.
I will just give some follow-up information. We will meet next Monday, February 24th, to determine next steps. The firm will be in contact with you, but we look forward to having conversation about your time with us. Thank you. Okay, good evening. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. We are going to get started on our last interview. Dr. Baker. I just wanted to say your name.
Let you know when we can start.
All right, just a quick reminder for those who are watching on live stream. If you go to grps.org, there is a link where you can provide feedback through our feedback forms. Those forms are in English and in Spanish. Right now, we are live streaming in English, but there will be a video posted later in Spanish, and that video will be up all week. There are also feedback forms for those who are here this evening. Please, if you would like to fill out a feedback form, we would like for everyone to fill out a form. Those will be available for you. I believe that they are on the desk as well. Dr. Roby?
You know, the one thing I said I was going to do, and I didn't, I should have just passed it out when I was shaking hands. So forgive me. For you to follow along.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We do have a copy already.
Oh, here, yeah, oh, yeah, has two pieces, yep.
Thank you. Okay, welcome, Dr. Roby. Thank you for being with us today. The board is pleased to have you as one of the finalists for the superintendency at Grand Rapids Public Schools. We are looking forward to learning more about you this evening. Before we get started, I have a few notes to make you aware of. All candidates have been asked the same questions this evening and will each go through the same process. You will have 15 minutes to provide your prepared presentation responding to our prompt, how can we accelerate learning and close the achievement gap for all learners in GRPS? Then your interview will take place over 60 minutes and include 17 questions. At the conclusion of each of these interviews, there's an opportunity for you to ask any question that you have of the board and provide closing remarks.
Okay.
All right, so
Thank
we'll
you.
let you get started. Thank you.
All right. Thank you again for having me. I'm excited to be back. My presentation, I was asked to do a presentation around the programmatic approach that you would take for closing the achievement gap and accelerating student learning. And so this is going to be kind of an overview of what that looks like because, as you know, closing the achievement gap is a complex and detailed kind of experience. And during a 15-minute window, I don't know that I could fully do it justice, but I'm going to give a great example of what I think would be a appropriate approach for closing the achievement gap. So the question and the opportunity in the district, it's how can we accelerate learning to close the achievement gap for all learners within the GRPS, Grand Rapids Public Schools system. The district has an academic transformation plan, and at present, there is a literacy crisis that is taking place in the state. You have state literacy proficiency that has remained in the lower echelon in comparison to other states across the nation, and this is especially highlighted for students of color around the areas of literacy. In addition to that, there's some urgency as the third grade reading law goes into effect in spring of this year, and that has implications related to what will happen to students who do not measure as proficient at the end of their third grade experience by the M-STEP assessments. I decided to use third grade as the baseline, and it does not mean that the other grades are not as important, but I think because third grade is a measurement that is used. That's the first time that students are formally assessed around their literacy proficiency, but it also speaks to that early childhood experience walking up to literacy in third grade, and then also the implications and what is expected for students after third grade. And so it has implications around younger children and what their experiences would be, how they learn within the GRPS system, how do we approach literacy from the standpoint of early childhood experiences, partnerships with the city, early family education, and what those literacy experiences are. Also, the implications of what takes place after third grade. How does this address our high school and middle school students when you talk about depth of knowledge and their experiences with literacy? So you look at your third grade literacy as your one data point, but it also has implications on younger students and older students. And when you think about depth of knowledge, that's recall, thinking, extended learning, higher order thinking skills. For our middle school students, how are they engaging in literacy? What are they dreaming about? And then for high school students, the implications is how is literacy impacting their application towards a literate world? And then finally, related to this particular question, how does third grade literacy impact the district's overall goal of every child being educated, self-directed, and a productive member of society? This is the third grade trend in the district over the past 5 years. And what I did for the school board, I took the liberty, if you look at the last page of the handout, there, I blew it up so you could see it. I wasn't sure how big it would show up on the screen, so I wanted to make sure that you're able to see it. There is an academic trajectory over the last 5 years where, excuse me, let me back up. The district has a goal around literacy proficiency. Specifically, this year, there's a 10% increase. There's a goal of having a 10% increase related to literacy improvement. But if you look at your trajectory from 2014 through 2019 for the different demographics of the district, you'll notice that the students of color, their literacy proficiency has pretty much remained stagnant with a little bit of an uptick for one particular group. And then also between our white students and students of color, you're starting to see expansion of the achievement gap. If I'm going too fast, please also, I'm trying to make sure that I stay within that time frame. All right, what do we know about the achievement gap? The achievement gap is a lot more complicated than just a data measure on an assessment. I want to propose that there are 5 different tenets of the achievement gap, starting with the preparation gap. The preparation gap is how students come to us. That's that early childhood experience where students have a literature-rich or literature-deficient background. So how students appear before they even begin school has impact on how students will perform in school. The belief gap is the second contributor to the achievement gap. And what that means simply is how do students, staff, parents, and larger community believe in students, and what do we instill in students? By our expectations, students rise or fall by our expectations, and what we state about what their ability to learn has impact on how they see themselves as learners. The time gap. The time gap simply means that children who have not had a lot of experiences with literature-rich backgrounds need more time. And how that looks, that means including longer extended day, enrichment experiences, extended school year, so that they have more time in literature-rich environments to kind of help address that gap. The teaching gap. The teaching gap is one of the single most predictors of student achievement from this standpoint. Highly effective teachers, good teachers make for good schools. And teachers, students who benefit from having 2 years or more of a strong, impactful teacher soar no matter what their academic, economic, language background is. And then the final part of the achievement gap is a leadership gap. So I'm not letting myself or others off the hook. From principals to superintendents to assistant superintendents to district leaders, how we provide resources and support also impacts how students do in school. That means resources for students, resources for teachers in their professional development to help develop their experiences. That is also a contributor to the achievement gap. Now, talked about the gap, let's talk about creating a plan. And so also on this document, on the last page, if you just turn over to the final page, I have it laid out in a little bit more detail. This is just a high-level overview of what the plan would include. And I want to make sure that you see that there are plenty of other steps that take place that would go into a plan to not only address the achievement gap, but then how do you accelerate learning, The first thing you want to do is look at your data over a period of time, your trend data. So you start with your third grade cohorts and see how they do at other mile markers, 5th grade, 8th grade, 11th grade SATs. That's an indication of the strength of your program around literature. Providing ongoing professional development, that means time for curricular writing among teacher teams, vertical alignment with literacy as the base across teaching teams, across content areas is extremely important. The wraparound outreach, and that's a whole community approach. How do you look at leveraging partnerships with the city, early childhood programs, ECFE, which is early childhood family education, ECSE, which is early childhood special education, reading corps, all of those things to help make a literature-rich community. And there's other things that take place within there. Aligning policies and resources, that means putting resources through professional development, through literacy coaches, through finances to ensure that you have a literature-rich background so that your teachers are allowed to get trained and provide those additional resources. Investments in classroom libraries, and I'll talk about that a little bit on my next slide, but all of those things, those resources to make sure that you have a literature-rich background within your school systems are important. And then the final thing about the plan is creating programs, and I'm going to give an example of a program that you could create that would programmatically address accelerating learning and also closing the achievement gap. This particular program that I'm suggesting is windows, mirrors, and doors. And it's a metaphor for how students see themselves engaged in literacy. And so the window is the development of how students see the wider world and how they fit in. A mirror is the reflection of students' own experiences and community back in the literature. So making sure that they have texts that reflect their experiences or authors that reflect their background in history. In this district, I am aware that there was a commitment by the district and in the schools to purchase libraries, classroom libraries specific around the environment or the backgrounds of all of the students at the elementary level. I think that's a strong commitment around having a program that reflects students in their community, to be able to see themselves and hear their stories within their community. And then finally, the door is using the writer's imagination that allows students to step into a created world or an existence that allows them to kind of see the world in a different way. Learning is accelerated and meaningful when it's connected to really lived experiences, creating cultural and intellectual legacy and connecting to a child's community is key. It's also important when you look at a windows, mirrors, and doors program, it's about the absent narrative, specifically around environments where community members or groups of folks have been marginalized or stories have not been told. And that has to be represented in a curriculum, in a strong curriculum. And what the next slide is some examples of what you might see in a windows, mirrors, and doors curriculum program. To address the achievement gap and to accelerate learning for all, the literacy gap has to be addressed. The experience of having an early childhood literature-rich background cannot be dismissed. So thinking about how do we address the achievement gap from a programmatic place and accelerate learning, it has to be literature rich. It has to be engaging for students at all levels. There has to be community outreach. So it's not just what students do when they come to school, it's what they do when they're outside of school and how are we building programs through literature outside of our school programs. The example I will use is the Michelle Obama book, Becoming, and then the companion book for a toddler, which is I looked up to Michelle Obama. So you can have a parent-child kind of connection between their, obviously the text will be very different, but it gives the children the experience of, I'm reading something similar to my mother or my grandmother or my father. Ensuring that all children have quality core instruction using the pre-K-12 Michigan language arts standards is key. And the final thing that I'll say related to this, using culturally responsive and engaging resources to support learning and academic standards. Literacy is the key to open the door to the world for children. When you have engaged students, and you see examples of engaged students at all different levels, engaged students in literacy means engaged students in school. Are there questions that I can answer?
Sorry, I'm stopping the timer. Sorry.
We're not
Okay.
allowed.
Okay. All right. I will just say also, what I gave you was a companion article related to the third grade trajectory around literacy and its impact for high school students, specifically at 10th grade, and then also at graduation. I thought that this was, it went along well with the presentation. So, thank you.
Thank you. So we will have follow-up questions throughout the interview time.
Okay.
So that is why we are refraining from questions now. But we will jump right into that time, and I'm going to set the timer. Our first question, we'll give you a moment.
Okay. All right, I'm ready.
Our first question for you is, what did you find most interesting about your visit to our buildings? What was your impression of what you saw and heard? Please be honest and direct with the good and possibly not so good.
Sure. I will say I was very impressed with the buildings that I had an opportunity to visit today. I visited an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school. And prior to that, my husband and I, we did a tour of the district, kind of seeing some different buildings, and I was really impressed with just the presentation of how the buildings looked. I know that many of the buildings are under construction right now, and I was like, okay, I can see where the district is going with this. What I was impressed with, as I talked with the 3 building principals, each of them had a problem of practice that they were working through with their staff this year. And I thought that was really important from the standpoint that they are educational leaders. They're thinking about what is something that is taking place within their schools and how are they engaging their staff around that particular problem of practice and what kind of the work that moving forward that they are planning to do. So I thought that was really a very strong statement to those educational leaders. I also had the awesome opportunity to talk with students today. I had high school students from each of the high schools, including the theme schools, the comprehensive high schools, and the alternative education high schools. And their questions were challenging and tough and very pointed. And I appreciated that they had thought about, what does this look like and what am I going to do? And they, asked me, what are you going to do about this particular issue? And I thought that was kind of fun. So I appreciate the engagement. An area that I heard over and over in conversations as I met with different stakeholders was similar to what you all asked me about 2 weeks or a week and a half ago, and that was with respect to the theme schools versus the neighborhood schools and a sense of unequal representation around how they're presented to the larger community and what resources are available to the larger community. So that's something that I've heard consistently.
How would you determine the strengths, capabilities of key administrative staff? Please also share how you might approach the difficult task of restructuring, reassigning, or releasing individuals as necessary.
I think it's important when you're talking about your admin team, your leadership team, to look at what their goals are, having conversation around those goals. I believe in having goals not just related to achievement, but also related to their leadership walk and also process goals, having discussions around how they're getting that work done, who are they including in that work, and then having a timeline of meeting with your admin team, your building principals, your cabinet members throughout the school year to help support those goals and also do a check-in as to their progress related to those goals. With respect to reassigning and releasing people, having conversations about what people are interested in, I think, is helpful when you're talking about reassigning. Sometimes you find out that people are misplaced. A high school principal may be better suited at the elementary level or vice versa. Having conversations about what their experiences are, I think, is an opportunity to kind of decide where people are going to make their best fit. With respect to releasing staff members, that's always a challenging decision. It's never something I take lightly. I believe in providing coaching for folks, being very honest around what their work is, with what I'm expecting, providing coaching and support. And then sometimes if it is not a match, and sometimes that does come into play, allowing them to leave the organization with dignity, I think is really, really important.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Think about one or two of the most difficult initiatives that you have implemented as an educational leader, and then discuss how you built consensus around those initiatives, and it helps to give us some examples.
Okay. I have an example. I'm working through it right now. Our district has recently adopted a new math curriculum, and it's at the secondary level. Well, we're actually doing it at both levels, at elementary and also at the secondary level. But in particular, the secondary level, it's been quite a bit of a challenge from the standpoint of it's a paradigm shift of how people have taught math in the past. We have gone through the process from a protocol and process standpoint of, looking at math curriculums to make sure that, one, are they aligned to state standards? And we got buy-in from teachers, we piloted the programs, and we made a decision as a group based around teacher recommendation about which math program we were moving forward. And now that we're kind of living in that particular math program, it has been a challenge around teachers facilitating, and I don't want to name the program because I don't know if that's necessarily important, but they're not doing that direct teaching, they're more facilitating of the math, and there has been a level of frustration for teachers, and I would even say for students. What I have done, I have actually reached out to the math company, and they are meeting with us in the next week around this, and it's not just myself, it's my director of mathematics, some teacher leaders at each of the school sites, and the building principals to have a conversation around what additional professional development we need to have in place so that teachers are able to feel successful as we go into year 2 of this particular math program. And I would say that has been a recent challenge related to the implementation of a program. You have a plan, but then when you're living through it, it's like, okay, this is where you need to make some adjustments around that plan.
Thank you.
What processes do you use to gather feedback on programs or initiatives? Can you give us a recent example of how you gathered feedback, for what purpose, and most importantly, what you did with the results?
Okay, so I won't use the example I just gave. I got another one. The process, whenever we bring forward a new initiative, I think it's important to ask for teacher voice or stakeholder voice, depending on who is the forward-facing person or persons who are going to be using that particular program or initiative, and have them be included in the process as we are looking at one program versus another. I think it's in what I have done and what I've instilled in my district is that we try to pilot a program at least for a period of time before we make a decision around it. Because whenever you're looking at a program and you might be working with vendors, it all sounds great and you want to make sure how is it going to manifest itself in your district with your students and your population. I think that's really, really important. So kind of walking through a process of piloting it and then deciding to bring it forward for adoption. We bring it to the school board and our district curriculum advisory group to say this is what our steps are. And how we evaluate it, it's through professional development. We make sure that we have structures in place as we roll out any sort of curricular program. We have professional development, that initial professional development before the school year begins, and then also plans professional development throughout the school year. So teachers have had an opportunity to kind of dive into the curriculum and then work with it and kind of, maneuver it a little bit, and then having additional professional development once the school year is underway. And their questions around the work looks very targeted because they've kind of experienced it a little bit, making sure that that's in place. Other supports that I make sure that we include are our instructional coaches are trained so that they're an additional resource for teachers between district professional development days and having some support throughout the school year in between times. Every professional development day, every time we lead a learning academy, we ask for feedback through survey data. We've done focus groups with teachers around particular programs to get feedback around how something is going or not. And that's how we kind of adjust up or decide we need to have more supports in a particular grade level or a particular school. So we ask for feedback to see what people are needing. And then the final thing is, what is our data looking like at the end of, and I'll use literacy. We are a Lucy Calkins district at the elementary level, and we look at our end of unit assessments to see how students are doing, and then through our PLCs have conversations around what the curriculum, the work of the curriculum and how they've had to adjust and what supports that they need. So that's kind of our process, or the process that I've developed.
What is the one thing you would protect, no matter the objections, if there was a need to make budget reduction recommendations to the board?
I would try to protect programs that affected students in school sites. And, I can't say I would call out like this one thing, but I would look at when you're talking about cuts, how can you keep cuts away from classrooms? And where can we be creative around other ways to massage some of those things? And that would be the area that I would try to protect first, is how the supports and things that are taking place in classrooms and at schools. That's not always popular, but that would be kind of the area that I would look to first to protect.
Under what circumstances would you consider eliminating an extracurricular or co-curricular program, and have you had to do this in the past? Conversely, are there any such programs that you advocated for expanding, and why?
Always the issue with cutting programs is the fear that you won't be able to have them back, I think. From my perspective, when you are looking at cutting an extracurricular or co-curricular program, you want to look at who's involved. I mean, is it a program that there's a lot of participation? And if there is, then what other avenues can we leverage with partnerships with community organizations or the city to keep that program in effect? It may look a little different if it's in partnership with another organization outside of the district, but there's ways to kind of work around that. With respect to have I had to cut programs, I try not to. And one of the programs that always seems to kind of rise to the top are the arts, specifically music programs. And I am a music mother. My baby boy, who is a senior in college, and I shared this earlier, he's been in the band the entire time from early elementary all the way through marching band at Central State. And so from a parent's perspective, I can appreciate that's the thing that has kept him hooked into school. And he's always been a strong student, but his passion has been around music. And that's why he wanted to stay, wanted to be in school and stay engaged. So I understand that. And so on a personal level, I always have a heart for the kids who have another kind of entry point for school, and they use sports or the arts or some other kind of avenue to stay connected. And when that has been an issue, when I was a principal, I partnered with the city and wrote some grants to have a community partner come in and teach lessons after school when we weren't able to keep our music program as strong as what we would have liked. And then we also were able to add a violin program specifically, and this was a Northside school, where we were able to add a violin program for kids who had never experienced the violin. And we started with our first graders and continued to kind of build up through our program. So again, if you have to cut, I always try to look for, okay, I don't have money over here, but where can I be creative and find resources and partnerships with other organizations?
Please help us to understand how you have engaged the local community and government in your capacity as an educational leader. Also, throughout this process and throughout the day, what have you learned about our community?
Okay. How have I engaged the local community, and what have I learned about GRPS?
Yes, how have you engaged the local community and government where you currently are?
Mhm.
And then throughout today's process, what have you learned about our community?
Okay. So I've had very positive relationships with local community and government. We have a strong partnership with the city of Richfield and Mayor Maria Reagan Gonzalez. She is the first Latina mayor in the nation, from my understanding. And and she's been a wonderful partner with our school district. We actually last year did a book launch and talking about the windows, mirrors, and doors. We co-sponsored a program with our sixth graders around Green Card Voices for Youth. And this was specifically around high school students who were immigrants and undocumented students and their stories. And we read that throughout our community, and our mayor, our city council members were in partnership with us and were reading this as part of our literacy plan. And so that's kind of a small example. With other issues where we've engaged the community, with legislators, I work very closely with our state legislators around our platform, specifically related to safe and supportive schools, unfunded mandates, and oftentimes the state will give mandates around, you have to have this program, you have to have this program, but they don't always support it. And so trying to get more clarity around how does that look and how do we support those programs. Also with cross-subsidy with special education and ELL services specifically, where the state also only funds to a certain percent. It's usually around 60 or 70%, and then districts are expected to kind of fill in the gap, but there has not been necessarily an increase in this current biennium related to funding. And so, being an advocate for my district and also in partnership with other districts in the area, as we meet with legislators around, these are the things that we are needing. So I think those are some examples on a more broader level of when I've had partnerships with local government. With specific to Grand Rapids, I actually had the opportunity to meet with your city manager, Dr. Washington, I think, Dr. Washington. And he and I had a really rich conversation about the partnerships, the city public-private partnerships, and some of the things that he was thinking about with the district. And I thought it was just a really robust conversation, and I was really excited about some of the things that he was talking about and was planning for the future. And so that was just kind of, you know, a small conversation, but I was excited behind the energy related to that.
Regarding special education, how do you create an effective environment of inclusion while also meeting distinct needs of all students?
So with special education students, I take the approach that they're general education students first, which means that they need to have exposure and access to the general education program and curriculum. With that, that's kind of their base. They are general education students first and foremost. They have individual education plans, IEPs, that require that you have to do additional services or supports for them. And it's important that they're exposed to their grade level content, but then also we're differentiating and making sure that they are exposed, getting their needs met through smaller class sizes or push-in model or pre-teaching things. So when you talk about inclusion, I like to see our special education students, whenever possible, be pushed into their general education classroom with a co-teacher, and that co-teacher and the general ed teacher working together around curriculum practices. I shared this with another group. I began my career as an inclusion teacher. I was a third grade inclusion teacher and was paired with a special education teacher, so that's how I learned how to do that. And I do believe when co-teaching is done well between a special education teacher and the general ed teacher, or an ELL teacher and the general education teacher, the students don't know the difference between who's getting support or not, because the teachers are in alignment on how they present the curriculum and their expectations, and they're co-teaching together, and that requires that they're planning together, that they're looking at all their students' data. They're looking specifically at the students that they're working with, of course, for our ELL teachers and our special education teachers, but they're also looking at what are their grade level peers doing and having conversation around that. And then when you're talking about inclusion, they should also be included in those PLCs, because that's where the planning takes place. So that all kind of builds into what kind of experiences our special education students will have when they enter classrooms.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Roby, during your career as an educator, can you let us know what you've specifically done to address and maintain a focus on staff morale for teams that you've led?
Maintain a focus on staff morale?
Yes.
That's important. As you are building community with, you expect teachers to build community with their students. As a educator, as a leader, I have to also be responsible for building community with the staff and encouraging building principals to build community and relationship with staff. When you talk about morale, celebrations, I think, are huge. We don't often in education celebrate enough. We often look at what we're not doing right. We look at test scores, we look at discipline data, but we don't also take the time sometimes to celebrate what has gone well. And so I think celebrations are huge. Also around community within your buildings or your district, sharing good news. People like to know what other folks are doing, and making sure that there's no secrecy around, oh, this particular school, look at them, they've increased their achievement by this percent to that percent. Other things that build staff morale, doing fun things. In our staff, with my staff, and this may seem a little hokey, so as I say it, it was fun. We did, I thought it was fun. And actually the staff, I think, thought it was fun too. We did The Amazing Race. And so, and what that is, and I don't know, the TV show The Amazing Race, where you have all these different, we did it around our community. And so we were in teams, and we put people in teams that wouldn't necessarily work together or connect, and they had different things that they had to do within an hour's time, and going to the fire department, going to the bakery, going to this particular school. And it's amazing how competitive people can get. And the reward was that we would sub in their classroom for an hour, where it was just an hour. They didn't have to do anything other than, let's set a date and time. And so people really wanted that reward. And so, I mean, and those are some things that kind of boost morale, and also, taking time to share good news. In my leadership team, one of the things that we do is share positive stories. It can be personal stories with, what's going on with your family, or an achievement that you've had with your team, or a school that you're working with. So sharing those positive stories also build morale.
Can you tell us about one of the most stressful situations you have experienced as an educational leader, and how do you handle personally stressful situations?
A stressful situation, it was actually a very tragic situation in my district, where we had the death of 2 students, and their father, and because it was a elementary girl, her middle school brother, and her father, and then the mother did not die, but was very seriously injured. I think it was stressful from the standpoint of, you're dealing with death at an elementary level and a middle school level, putting systems in place to make sure you have strong communications with the school site, and support and resources for the site with counselors and social workers. And then also trying to manage, because often with these type of tragedies, you're trying to get accurate information so that you can report out to your community appropriately. But then you have social platforms where people are kind of talking ahead of you and saying things on Facebook and such, and trying to be proactive in communication, and not responding to different things that you don't necessarily know are true or not. And so that can be a lot to manage. And this particular situation happened on a Friday afternoon, and so we were fortunate that we were able to convene our team on Saturday and Sunday to kind of create a plan of action going into that Monday at those particular school sites, and then also informing the other schools. So we had 2 schools that it directly impacted, but then there's always siblings and cousins and other people at other schools, and making sure that those school administrators and school secretaries had that information as well. And so I think that would be probably one of the more stressful situations, because you're dealing with, the human emotion, the sadness, the tragedy around the death, but then also you have to kind of go into a technical kind of, what are the systems to make sure that we're supporting school sites and managing communication around that. And I'm sorry, Reverend
And so
Matthews, you
how
said-
do you personally handle stress?
I have a great support system, and personally, how I handle stress, I begin with prayer for me, and I believe in that. I start my day actually every morning walking through the Bible on my app. I have an app on my phone, and that's something that I do to kind of ground me. In addition to that, I have a great support system. My husband and I are best friends. He thinks he's a comedian. But he keeps me laughing, and so and I think it's important with these types of position, you have to have life-work balance. So I have things that center me, but then I also have people around me that can make me laugh, and we have fun and things like that. And I think it's important. I also encourage my staff to do things that make them laugh and kind of take some of the stress around the work that they're doing away, because these jobs can be stressful at times, but they're very rewarding. But you have to have the balance. If you're able to stay healthy, you've got to be able to figure out some different stress relievers. And then I also exercise. That's something I have committed to this year, where I am going to the health club to kind of get those endorphins going every morning. So those are kind of the areas that I use for balance.
Excellent. It'd be great if we could all do that. How will you ensure high educational standards are set, clearly communicated, and met?
It's important as a superintendent, working very closely with district cabinet to set goals around academic standards. You want to include the voices of your admin team, your building principals, setting those goals. And so making sure that that's communicated to them through staff meetings, through team meetings, through one-on-one meetings around their leadership development. I talked a little bit, about when you're working with building principals, making sure that they have not only an achievement goal, but a leadership goal that helps kind of hold them to that standard of what that work looks like. Communicating to your broader community, I love to do, because then that holds you accountable. I think it's important when you're saying this is our goal of 10% increase in ELA standards or math standards, making sure that that's communicated broadly so people can hold you to that work. And then as far as meeting those standards, you don't just set the goal and you don't look at it again till the goal expires. It's what are the systems in place, and you talk about your data cycle. So you have your goal, and then you have data points of when you're going to measure that goal. If you're talking about district goals around student achievement, that may mean looking at data points using NWA assessments, end of unit assessments, those kind of things throughout the course of the school year to see how closely you are to obtaining those goals.
Thank you very much.
Okay. How does a superintendent ensure that athletics and the arts are utilized to support the whole child and are also educationally based?
As I kind of mentioned before, I think it's important that both the arts and athletics are part of a robust program. It's everybody, as much as we want to, and as an educator, I want to think that everybody wants to come to school to get better at science or math or social studies, but sometimes the hook is a little different for different kids. And so you have to have different on-ramps for young people, and that may mean the arts or athletic programs. It also, when you talk about the whole child or that it's educationally based, it starts at the elementary level and having a strong articulation all the way through. So elementary through club sports, after school programming, and then when they get to middle school, AAU teams, middle school combined teams, and then also feeding into the high school programs. What I noticed about your district, and I learned this today, with some of your smaller high schools, students are able to participate in sports at some of the larger high schools, and I thought that was kind of awesome. That builds a sense of community. So just because you might be at a targeted magnet school that may not have a particular sport, you can participate in another school that offers that sport. So I thought that was a really strong commitment to that. And again, educationally based, your coaches should be included in professional development where it's appropriate, training around how do you differentiate, how do you engage all learners. And when I think about coaching in particular with sports, every child is going to develop at a different time, and it's important that the coach coaches from the positive, just like you would expect a classroom teacher to teach from the positive. It doesn't mean that you don't give feedback around performance, but you should do it in a way where students can be encouraged and want to try harder versus just hearing negative feedback related to that. And so that would be a way to kind of support it from an educational base. With the arts in particular, again, I'm a arts mom. I think starting at the elementary where kids develop their love for the arts and or even the willingness to kind of explore, having robust programs with musicals and entry-level arts programs and building them all the way through your system, making sure that you have access to them at both elementary, middle, and high school is important to build a strong program.
In your judgment, what are the 3 most critical things a good principal does?
Having been a building principal, I would say the 3 most important things, they have to be visible in their building and in their classrooms. Students should know their building principal, and they shouldn't just know them if they're the students who are sometimes who challenge us behaviorally. They should know the kids who, that's the nicest way I can say it. I don't want to say, you know, the naughty kids, but they should know their building principal and have a relationship with the building principal. And I think that the principal needs to make an effort to connect with their students and be visible within the classroom. It's important that building principals are educational leaders. They need to understand what curriculum is and what good teaching is and what it is not, and also to be able to support their staff around that. And I look for principals who are able to coach their staff, give feedback that is meaningful. So not just to say, you know, you did a good job, but this is where I saw you engage your students, or I liked how you asked this higher level thinking question, and then you challenge your kids to go deeper. So giving them very specifics, you know, around their curricular practices and instructional practices. And the third thing that I would look for a strong principal, you have to be an advocate for your program. You know, how are you championing your program to the district, to the larger community? Why would someone want to come to your particular school? Are you a cheerleader for your program? And when you're out and about in the community talking about the good work that is taking place at your school or new programs that you're initiating, so people want to take a closer look around what's taking place at your program.
How do you provide the oversight and or lead others who have the direct responsibilities in a district in this size? And specifically, how do you hold others accountable for delivering the mission of the district?
Oversight and delivering mission of district. You said something else too. I'm sorry, I didn't catch all of it.
How do you provide the oversight and or lead others who have the direct responsibility in the district this size? Specifically, how do you hold others accountable for delivering on the mission of the district?
Thank you. Setting goals, and I kind of talked about that a little bit, and being very clear with people around these are the goals. I don't believe in micromanaging people. I think that it's important to give people the opportunity to lead. We do it in consultation though, so I don't just say, okay, we're setting a goal and I'll check you out, you know, 6 months from now. But it's important to have conversation with your leaders, and this is the work that I have done both in Minneapolis and also currently in Richfield, where people who have direct leadership over a particular department, we have conversations around what their work is. We talk about their goals, what things they may be struggling with, and how I can provide support, or how I can connect them with another director or another person who can offer some resources. So it's a continual conversation around what that work looks like. And for a district this size, I don't think it changes. It becomes, just broader to manage, making sure you have touch points with each of those departments or the people who are leading that, and having conversation around what that work looks like. And the mission of the district, delivering the mission of the district. Well, everything that we should do should start with the mission of the district. And that's kind of the starting point, and figuring out the specific goals in ELL or special education or gifted and talented. How does that measure up to the overall district mission and vision? But I do believe in allowing people to lead, because these are smart people, and I trust that you understand what your work is, but we're going to be in consultation around what that work is, and having check-in points around their goals. At present, with my teaching and learning team, we meet as a whole team weekly and talk about goals, and then also I meet individually one-on-one with them once a month around their specific goals of the areas that they directly supervise. And that's a nice way for me to check in as to what's going on, where can I provide some support and guidance, and then where I can offer some redirection if appropriate. Also, I do companion learning walks with my team. So as they go on their site visits to work with schools, I sometimes tag along and just kind of listen to the conversation. So when I'm working with them one-on-one about their leadership, I can give them some insight and feedback related to how they're guiding the work at their school sites.
If we were to ask your direct reports or administrative team to describe your qualities or characteristics in 3 adjectives, what would they say?
They would say I'm collaborative. I believe in engaging others in their voice and asking their expertise. I don't have to be an expert at everything, and respecting that people have different experiences than mine, and asking for their advice and opinion, and how do we do this work together. I think I would be described as equity and outcomes driven. I set goals around the work, and then I also tie them to outcomes. So it's not just we're going to set a goal and then not have any sort of measurement of what that work looks like. And the final thing I think that they would say is I'm pretty strategic. I try to plan and look at kind of what the plan is, where are our stop gaps, what could possibly go wrong, and kind of have a plan for the plan. And so those would be the things that I would say.
So you have had a marathon today. I feel like we've had a marathon, but not as long as you. So this is your last question for the evening, and that is, do you have any questions for us?
My gosh. This has been, and I will say, this has been an awesome day. It has been a marathon, but I have truly, truly enjoyed it. And this is a wonderful district. You have very strong educators, very passionate educators, and you have to know that that as I've gone and talked to different people, their questions have been, some of them have been kind of tough, and I think that's important, but they've always, I think that they were very reflective on, how is she going to match our needs? And so I'm appreciative of that. I would say my question for this board would be, based on some of the things that your community has shared over this last cycle, what would be the top 1 or 2 things that you would like me, if I'm selected, to focus on to consider this a successful start?
I would say plan to be here for a while, so that way.
Okay.
And I mean, it sounds like it's obvious, but really, I think that the work, there isn't really much 100-day work to do. It's more long-term work, you know. And I think that you could do some good 100-day work. But I think that, I think that you've identified the challenges of the district around the equity issues, especially, real and perceptive wise in terms of the theme and the we want to create a district where all the kids can have the capacity to go to college if they want to, and so that's implementing plans that move us towards that. Connections with community, special ed. I think that those are all things that, but I really don't think that we have anything that needs a quick fix. I think that what we have are laying the foundations to move forward and to move on. And I think that you have a great community to work with, as you learned today, and a great board to work with to do that.
I think the idea too that you take time to get to know us and to know the cabinet and to listen to the cabinet about where they've been and where they want to go. And I think you've already found that we have some outstanding leaders and teachers and principals and good people working in our district. And my impression of this district is that almost every person that I talk to, whether it's a teacher or a principal or somebody in the cabinet, everybody wants to do what's right, and it works down to what's best for kids.
I think that the superintendent role in this city, as in every city, is critical. Few people have a unique opportunity to impact, domino effect, 17,000 lives. Imagine the impact that produces in a decade. And so realizing that, including the staff are forever changed too. Kids change staff's lives. And so to realize that, I think for us as a board, as Dr. Baker alluded, we're not looking for a quick fix. We're really looking for a person that will partner with this district and continue the positive changes that we're seeing. I think you're right. You have in these folks an investment too. They're looking for a person to invest in them, but they're also looking to invest in producing for themselves a good workplace, but also impacting this city. And so I would hope that would happen in the person that we choose.
I would say that we really need someone who is intentional and committed to make sure all the students in our district have access and opportunity.
Anyone else? Well, I want to reiterate, as a leader, if selected, you will find me outcomes and equity driven. I am very collaborative. I do believe in achievement for all. My career has suggested that is my work. It's not something that I take lightly. I want all children in the community to do well, because I believe that if all of our children do well, then the community only benefits from that. I am not interested in a fly-by-night kind of position. I want to be here in Grand Rapids. I have researched your district and have thought very long and hard about this being a great match for me as far as who I am as a person and the work that you all are doing, and to continue to build upon that. I am extremely excited and honored that I was invited back. I think, this is an awesome community, and I would love to be a part of it. And I hope that my leadership and the work that conversations that I've had with your community, that has shown through. And so I do appreciate and thank you for the opportunity just to come back and share a little bit more about myself.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
for joining us this evening. Just a quick note on what next steps are. The board will be meeting on Monday, February 24th at 5:30 p.m. Here in the auditorium where we will be selecting our next superintendent. Thank you. Please be sure to fill out a feedback form. We really want to hear your feedback, and thank you for coming. Meeting adjourned.
No problem.